Hey, everyone on the webinar. If you'd like to do a mic check, please raise your hand.
Hey, Steven, I just wanted to do a mic check.
Yep.
Everything good?
Yep, sound good.
Thank you.
If anyone wants to do a mic check on the webinar, please raise your hand.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the August Mid-Atlantic Council meeting. We have new mics, as you guys can tell, so Stephen's going to be. All right, let's try this. Round 3. Test 1, 2, 3. That sounds a little bit better.
Let's try it.
All right.
Just try to do that.
Is it better now?
Yeah.
All right, maybe it was too close. As you can see, our old microphones, when you used to see red, was bad. So now I guess red means that it's off and green will be for you to talk. But welcome to Philadelphia to the August council meeting. We're going to start off with the first agenda item, the swearing in of new council members. Let's start, we'll go ahead, Mike Penny, Regional Administrator, will be swearing in returning member Skip Feller. And we have 2 new members, Anna Beckworth and James Gilmore. And we have 1 more that'll be sworn in tomorrow or Wednesday.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm going to stand up and ask the 3 council members who need to be sworn in, stand up, please. And as we've done, I'll just do the oath as a series of questions and then turn to Jim, Anna, and Skip to respond, hopefully in the affirmative. So getting started, do you, as a duly appointed member of a regional fishery management council established under the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act, hereby promise to conserve and manage the living marine resources of the United States of America by carrying out the business of the council for the greatest overall benefit of the nation? Anna? Jim? Skip? Do you recognize your responsibility to serve as a knowledgeable and experienced trustee of the nation's marine fisheries resources, being careful to balance competing private and regional interests, and always aware and protective of the public interest in those resources? Anna? Jim? Skip? Do you commit yourself to uphold the provisions, standards, and requirements of the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act and other applicable law, and shall you conduct yourself at all times according to the rules of conduct prescribed by the Secretary of Commerce? Anna? Jim? Skip? And last, is this oath given freely and without mental reservation or purpose of evasion? Jim? Skip? Congratulations, you are hereby sworn in as council members.
All right, let's move on to our next agenda item, which will be the election of officers. John Almeida.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Little quiet, but let's see if we can adjust on this end.
Okay, I'll try to hold the mic closer. Is that any better?
Try it one more time.
Can you hear me okay now?
Yes, you sound fine.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll now conduct elections for the positions of Chair and Vice Chair of the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council. And we'll do this in accordance with the procedures described in the Council's Statement of Organization Practices and Procedures. To start, I'd ask Mr. Semino, the chair of the nominating committee, to provide the nominations that he's received for the positions of chair and vice chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've had 3 separate nominations for one individual for chair, and that is for the current chair, Wes Townsend. I've also had 2 individual nominations for 2 individuals for vice chair, and that is for Mike Louisi and for Skip Feller.
Thanks, Joe. We'll turn first to the chair position. And at this point, I'll call for any additional nominations from voting council members for the position of council chair. And if there are any additional nominations for chair, please use your raised hand function to indicate that you'd like to nominate someone for the position of council chair. Okay, seeing no hands, I'll just confirm that no one in the room is physically raising their hand.
No.
Okay, hearing none, I now declare nominations for the position of council chair closed. And where we only have one nominated candidate, by operation of the council rules on elections, Wes Townsend is hereby elected by acclamation. Congratulations, Wes.
Thank you. I don't know if I'm doing a good job or you guys hate me that much that you want me to have the role again. But thank you.
I'm sure it's the former, Wes. Now we'll turn to the position of vice chair. So in addition to the nominations of Mike Louisi and Skip Feller, do any voting council members wish to present any additional nominations for the position of vice chair? Anyone interested in providing an additional nomination, please use the raise hand function. I don't see any raised hands online. Wes, if you could confirm there's no physical raised hands in the room.
There is none in the room.
Okay, so hearing none, I now declare nominations for the nominations for the position of vice chair to be closed. And at this point, Mary is going to hand out ballots to council members. I will note that one council member is ill and not able to be in the room. He's going to let Mary know. She will put his vote on a ballot, and Mary will collect the ballots in a few minutes, and we'll count them and determine the vice chair position. Please be sure not to mark your ballot in a way that would indicate who is voting. And if you don't wish to vote for a candidate, please write abstain on the ballot.
All right, let's take a few minutes breaks. We'll come back at 1:20. All right, welcome back, everyone. John Almeida, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. After reviewing the results of the voting, Mike Luisi received a majority of the votes cast and is therefore one election to the position of Vice Chair of the Council. Congratulations, Mike.
All right, John, do you have anything further to bring to us?
Nope, that's it for this year.
All righty, thank you very much. I'd also like to recognize someone new that'll be sitting around the table. Lieutenant Commander Matt Cayley has been moved on, and Miss Katie Moore will be taking his place this week. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you very much.
All right, let's move on to our golden tilefish specifications. We need to adopt specifications and management measures for 2025 through 2027. Dr. John Hare, whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm going to walk through the results of the Golden Tilefish Management Track Assessment to help inform your conversations on specification. I just don't see it on the screen in front of me, so I'm just waiting for it to come back. Okay.
You let me sit there for a second.
Yeah. No worries. Thank you very much. So I'm going to be going through the Golden Tilefish Management Track Assessment. Dr. Simpkins sends his regards. He was in the end not able to attend, and so I'll be giving this presentation and the Black Sea Bass presentation on Wednesday. So just a little background on golden tilefish biology and the fishery. It's a long-lived, non-migratory demersal species. It inhabits submarine canyons near the shelf break at depths of 80 to 440 meters. It burrows into soft bottom. They make grottos, which I just love the sound of a tilefish grotto. They're sexually dimorphic with males growing to larger sizes than females. They prefer a narrow temperature range between 9 and 14 degrees Celsius, and that sort of defines that relatively, it sounds like a large depth range, 80 to 440 meters, but that's a relatively narrow spatial range at the shelf edge, and that spatial range is defined by their narrow temperature preference. They recruit to the fishery at age 4, and they mature at age 5, and there is a small directed IFQ longline fishery with 4 permit holders making up about 80% of the landing. So the previous assessment was conducted in 2021 via a management track. It used the assessment ASAP model, age structured assessment model, with the terminal year of data being 2020. It included commercial landings and size at age data, and uses a commercial catch per unit index of abundance. Reference points were calculated from the assessment with the MSY proxy at 0.26 and the spawning stock biomass at MSY proxy of 10,995 metric tons. In 2021, the stock status was not overfished. It was about 96% of the biomass MSY proxy, and overfishing was not occurring. The F values were 61% of the FMSY proxy. In 2023 and 24, we conducted a research track assessment to improve the golden tilefish assessment methods. I'll just quick run through the advancements that were made during that research track. A previous presentation was given to this council on more detail on the research track. So it transitioned the assessment model from ASAP to WAM. WAM is the Woods Hole assessment model. It used sort of WAM in a data limited application configurations. And there were investigations with WAM into the effects of time and age varying survival and selectivity in the fishery to see how those affected model outcomes. And this is an important point. With ASAP, there is no way to include time or age varying survival, no way to include time or age varying selectivity in a fishery, but WAM has that capability. So we're able to look at these parameters as they change through time. We worked with industry and other partners to investigate new indices for use in the assessment. We developed a new recreational catch time series, a discard time series for directed and non-directed fisheries, and we researched available resources on other abundance information, and that's all documented in the research track assessment report. We also produced an ecosystem and socioeconomic profile report for tilefish to evaluate ecosystem indicators and provide a framework for further investigations of stock status and biology. So some of the changes between the 2023-2024 research track and the previous management track assessment. Data was updated through 2023 and included all available removals, including newly developed time series on recreational catch and commercial recreational discards. And in the research track, there was no preferred model identified by the research track peer review. A number of different models were presented making different assumptions, and the research track peer review did not select any one of those models as the preferred model, sort of left the range of models on the table, and recommended to the Northeast Fisheries Science Center to go through and do additional model investigation in preparation for the 2024 management track. So the Northeast Fisheries Science Center formed a tilefish tiger team that went through the model features and responded to the research track review recommendations to identify, sort of acceptable and biologically plausible model for use in the research track. Some of the changes that were adopted in the management track included adding a time and age varying effects on survival and selectivity, including full selection of individuals in the age of 5 and 6. And this model choice was very determinative. This change, full selectivity of age 5 and 6 in the commercial fishery, is largely responsible for lowering the estimated spawning stock biomass from the 2021 management track to the 2023 research track, 2024 management track. So if we look at estimated catch coming out of the management track assessment, you can see catches were high earlier in the time series and have come down and been much more consistent later in the time series. You can see the location of catches is predominantly south of Long Island, east of New Jersey. Those blue areas are where catches are higher. The gray areas in this slide represent where tilefish have been caught. But so the catches are concentrated along the shelf break, east of New Jersey, south of Long Island, south of Cape Cod and the Vineyard. In terms of the indices that are available, again, it's catches on the backdrop, the bars, and then there are 3 catch per unit effort indices that have been used, 2 historically and 1 which has been updated. We have the weighted catch per unit effort index, that was historically used. We have the VTR, catch per unit effort index, which is the one that is continuing. And we have a Turner CPUE index that was used in the past. So again, it gets to this point that the data that is available for this model is relatively limited. But we use these three catch per unit effort indices and the catches in the management track model. When we look at the results of the assessment model, the graph on the left is projected or estimated biomass. The sort of solid line is the estimated biomass from the new 2024 management track. The gray sort of around that black line is the uncertainty, and the dotted line is the estimated biomass from the previous 2021 management track. And you see that difference, 2021 management track estimated biomass was higher, 2024 management track estimated biomass is lower, and that again is largely attributed to the assumptions made regarding selectivity of fish in the commercial fishery. So in the current assessment model, it's assuming full selectivity of 5- and 6-year-olds. In the previous assessment model, it was only partial selectivity. So the word that's used in that regard is there was a cryptic biomass of 5- and 6-year-olds in the previous ASAP model. With the full selectivity on those age classes, there's no animals that are not available to the fishery. On the right, we have the recruitment time series. Again, the black line is from the new model. The shaded around the black line is the uncertainty in those model estimates. And then the dotted line is from the previous assessment. And in general, the recruitment estimates from the 2021 and 2024 management track assessments line up with a little bit more variability in the sort of earlier in the time series. When we look at the biological reference points and stock status, the top graph is, can't even see the top graph, here we go. The top graph is the spawning stock biomass to the spawning stock biomass at 40% F. It's an indicator of the sort of the productivity of the stock. It's been relatively flat since the early 2000s with a little bit of up and down. But that dotted line is the reference point. So the spawning stock biomass to spawning stock biomass proxy is a little bit below. And then if we look at the F to F proxy, again, fishing mortality rates have come down, have been relatively constant over time. And then that colorful plot in the middle is a Kobe plot, and it demonstrates sort of overfishing, overfished, and just a way to look at the uncertainty in the model. So currently the model is estimating F as above the F proxy, that's the vertical axis, and it's estimating spawning stock biomass above the spawning stock biomass proxy. So the current model is estimating that overfishing is occurring, but the stock is not overfished. So if we look at projections from the current 2024 management track, it's estimating catch to be 681 metric tons in 2024, spawning stock biomass of 488 metric tons in 2024, with a fishing mortality rate of 0.225. And then projecting the model forward, we estimate that catch, allowable catch, the catch advice could increase each year, going 2025, 2026, 2027. Estimate that the spawning stock biomass will continue to grow from 5,683 metric tons to 7,002 metric tons by 2027, at that sort of constant fishing mortality rate of 0.211. And then it shows, the graph shows the projection with the, when you project, you're assuming an average recruitment in the future with a distribution around that. So that's where you get your error in your projection. But it shows the estimated recruitment as those sort of flat blue bars on the right-hand side of that plot. And so the research track, in terms of research recommendations in the management track assessment, the management track assessment addressed many of the research recommendations coming out of the research track. Sort of looked at, reviewed all of the available research recommendations. And it really did sort of did that model evaluation that was called for from the research track review recommendations. And so we addressed all of the recommendations that the research track peer review panel indicated as necessary for the management track assessment to be conducted. So just running through some of those, the research panel really had many comments and sort of focused on model selection. If you remember correctly, the panel made no determination as to which was the preferred model for use in management. And their recommendation was to the Northeast Fisheries Science Center to go through and do an evaluation and choose a model for the management track, which the Northeast Fisheries Science Center did with that Tilefish tiger team. But some of the comments from the peer review, it's a sparse data, complex life history, and significant transitions in fisheries management measures created challenges in the assessment regarding sort of the model identification. The final model selection process that was conducted was thorough and well-reasoned. The detailed investigations of model performance tests within WAM suggested that the earlier conclusions of stock status were optimistic. Again, that comes down to making the assumption of full selectivity on age 5 and 6-year-olds in the commercial fishery. And it noted the vulnerability of the population if these year classes are products of newly mature fish rather than sort of that less vulnerable cryptic spawning stock biomass. So there's still the uncertainty about what is potentially driving recruitment. And so the takeaways for Tilefish, the Northeast Fisheries Center Tilefish tiger team worked extensively on the model configuration to satisfy the research track peer review panel's recommendations. All of the management track terms of reference were satisfactorily addressed as determined by the peer review panel for the management track. This management track assessment represents the best scientific information available, and the recommendation is that there has been a status change. The stock is experiencing overfishing, and the stock is not overfished. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for John? Michelle Duval?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Hare, for the presentation. And this might be a question for, well, see if you can answer it. Remind me how the recreational catch was incorporated, since there was actually a recreational catch stream that was actually incorporated into this assessment. I know this was reviewed at the SSC meeting, but I'm just trying to recall how all the different recreational catch data sources between MRIP and VTR and large pelagic survey were all sort of mushed together to come up with that.
So, recreational data was included, in 2 ways. One is as a catch, which is a removal from the fishery. And then, sort of a catch per unit effort index was made from the recreational data. They didn't call it a catch per unit effort. I think it was a landing per unit effort index. And then that was used as an independent index of abundance, similar to the CPUE indices that are developed from the vessel trip report. So the catch data is being used as removals, but then also adjusted and used as an index of abundance.
Mike Penny?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. John, if you can go back 2 slides, or someone can go back 2 slides. There was a statement that I'm curious about, and maybe you don't have the answer, but there was reference made to one of the challenges with the model being significant transitions in fishery management measures. And given that we've managed pretty stable with an ITQ for the last 15 years, I'm curious what might be behind that statement.
mean, again, I think it's, stock assessment models are trying to model the population over the whole period where data is available. And if, so we're using data before the ITQ fishery went into place. And I think it's that transition which creates some uncertainty in the model. The two CPUE indices were based initially in that pre-ITQ fishery, and then we stop those series and then go forward with the series that's based on the ITQ fishery, and sort of breaks in time series like that create uncertainty. So I think it was more just noting those potential challenges. Did that answer your question, Mr. Regional Administrator?
Any more questions around the table? Any from the audience? Seeing none. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Jose, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So as was indicated, we're going to be looking at the specifications for 2025 through 2027 for golden tilefish. I'm going to give a quick review of the current regulatory process. I'm going to skip the management track assessment results because John just went over that. Then we're going to spend some time looking at the recent fishery performance, specifically reviewing the fishery information document and the fishery performance report. Paul Rego will then go into describing the SSC discussion. And finally, I will talk about the monitoring committee recommendations and staff recommendations. And the objective, once again, is to adopt catch and landings limits for 25, 26, and 27, and other changes to other management measures if necessary. So we're currently in the last year of the current specifications cycle that was set back in 2021. Here on the right, you have the catch and landings limits for this year, and they were the same for 2022, 2023, 2022, and 23 as well. And the bottom line there is that we have a IFQ quota of 1.763 million pounds and an incidental quota of about 75,400 pounds. In addition, the council also implemented an 8 fish per angler per trip back limit and an incidental trip limit of 500 pounds. And those are the same management measures that were implemented for the prior specification cycle as well. So I'm going to skip this. This is a management track assessment discussion that John just went over that in detail. This is table 1 of the fishery information document, and it's an abbreviated table. And basically, I want to bring your attention to, I cannot see from here, it's not on my screen. Landings from 2007, they came in at for 2022, excuse me, they came in at 1.67 million pounds. That was about 90% of the quota taken for that year. In 2023, 1.41 million pounds were landed. That was about close to 80% of the quota for that year. But one of the interesting things here is that commercial landings have been relatively stable, ranging from 1.4 to 1.7 million pounds in the last 3 years. The bulk of the fishery is caught by bottom long line, and there are some catches by auto trawl vessels as well that catch things incidentally, and a few other gear types that are presented in table 2 of the fishery information document. 3 statistical areas accounted for 90% of the tilefish landings in 23, 616, 537, and 526. And those landings are close, I mean, the same areas that John was just showing, where the center of abundance for tilefish is. And 98% of the landings came from three port areas. 68% of the landings came from Montauk and Hampton Bays combined in New York, 28% from Barnegat Lie, and 2% from Point Judy in Rhode Island. And this is the map that shows you where the landings are. The dark blue areas is where the bulk of the landings are coming from. Again, center of abundance for the species. In 2023, 1.3 million pounds landed weight came in. That was a 6% decrease from 2022. The ex-vessel revenue was $6.1 million. That was also a 6% decrease from 2022. So the mean price was $4.7 per pound in 2023, and that's the same as in the prior year. This figure here comes from Garfo weekly quota monitoring system, and you can see the blue dotted line shows the incidental landings for the yellow line shows the incidental landings for last year. So we're slightly ahead of the incidental landings from last year at the same time period. About 36,000 pounds have been landed, 48% of the quota. It doesn't look like the quota is going to be taken completely. 64 dealers bought Tilefish from 125 vessels in 2023. And the bulk of those dealers are located in New York, New Jersey, and Rhode Island. Now, moving into the recreational fishery, I'm going to be talking briefly about recreational statistics information from the National Marine Fisheries Service. And for the 82 to 2023 period, landings range from 0 for most years to a high of 200,000 fish in 2010. And in 2023, about 26,000 tilefish were reported landed. So this table here shows you landings for the entire time series. And as you can see, there are a lot of holes there, a lot of zeros. You can see zeros in many years, and then suddenly landings increased to 100,000 or 200,000 fish per year. So, and then the other thing that is noticeable here is the PSC values that are very high, higher than 50%. So these estimates are highly uncertain, and RIP doesn't capture this fishery well. It's a rare event species. This table shows VTR landings for the party charter fishery. In 2023, 5,438 fish were landed by party charter vessels. There was a decrease of about 300 fish from the prior year, less than 5% decrease in landings. And on the right, we have the newly implemented private reporting values. In 2023, about 200 fish were landed. That was a decrease of 100 fish from the prior year. So as you can see from that table that I just showed you, and we have had many discussions about this in the past, the private angling reporting rates are still lower than expected. The council is working with a contractor on 2 projects to improve the catch and effort data collection and doing a program review as well. The council will receive a detailed presentation from Willie Goldsmith that is here today with us at the next council meeting. So you're going to have a lot more time to review this in the future. As John indicated multiple times, the 2024 Management Track Assessment incorporated a newly developed recreational landings time series. That was never done before. Recreational landings for 2020 were tabulated at 48,601 pounds. And for 2023, 59,966 pounds. As you can see, those are really small amounts compared to the total removals, ranging from 3 to 4%, but it's an important number that we are going to be using in developing the catch and landings limits. Now, recreational landings in this fishery can be accounted for under scientific uncertainty or management uncertainty. Just keep that in mind. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a few minutes. And lastly, before I go into the AP discussion, I want to talk briefly about the tilefish surveys. There are plans to conduct another tilefish survey next summer. So we're going to have a total of 4 surveys relatively soon. The goal of the 25 survey is to extend the time series to derive an index of abundance for the stock that can be used in the future for stock assessment purposes. John Hare just talked about the lack of that type of information, so this is very important. And also to collect other biological information to support golden tilefish stock assessment. So we met with the advisors late June, and there's a lot of information in the briefing book. I'm just going to highlight some of the things that are most relevant from the discussion. The industry is still experiencing market issues. When the Fulton market was relocated to Hunts Point, some business were lost that were never returned. The market cannot handle too much volume of tilefish, or prices drop drastically. There's also sometimes when the tilefish from the South Atlantic comes into up north into the Fulton market, prices also go down quite drastically. Tilefish is very sensitive to that quantity that is being landed. And advisors also indicated that while the quality of the fish that comes from the South Atlantic is not as good as the one from the Mid-Atlantic, still it impacts prices. They also commented on windy conditions and how that impacts fishing, the time and the trip duration in some instances. So obviously that makes fishing harder. They indicated that MRIP not to be used as a tool for management or stock assessment purposes. And some of the AP members also questioned how applicable and accurate the large pelagic survey data is to characterize tilefish landings. That was part of the data that was used to develop the recently used time series for recreational landings. They also indicated that they continue to see and catch a good mix of fish sizes in 2023. So this is a good thing. They're seeing, and I don't know if John showed a bubble plot or not, but you can see that you're getting all the different market categories. You see that the large fish continue to be strong in the landing. So overall, things are working well. Most of the directed IFQ boats are not operating at full capacity. If they do not work cooperatively, they will destroy the market. What that means is that they try to spread the landings throughout the year. They're trying to supply consistently across the year and try to keep those prices robust as well. Multiple AP members indicated that captains and crew members should be included in the commingle back limit. And what that means for a trip, what that means is that the captains and the crew members should be allowed to keep a fish, up to 8 fish per trip as well. Another AP member, however, or other AP members, however, noted disagreement with this given the overfishing status of the stock. And they also indicated strong concerns about the lack of sampling at the dock, and that's something that has been going on for a few years. So this table here is a flow chart that tells you how the catch and landings limits are developed for golden tilefish. Above the dashed line, we account for scientific uncertainty. The SSC does that, and that's how they derive the ABC from the OFL, and that's equal to the ACL. Below the dashed line, The monitoring committee takes into account management uncertainty. We take away discards and so on to derive TALs and also the IFQ amount and the incidental category quota amount. So on the top right there, you can see recreational catches. And for this fishery, that can be accounted under scientific uncertainty or management uncertainty. And as you will see later, we're recommending that is accounted under management uncertainty. And now we have a discussion of the SSC findings, and Paul Rego is online, and he's going to be talking about this. Paul, can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, Jose. Thank you for the nice setup, and thank you, John, for describing the research and management tracks so well. As John indicated, this is not your father's stock assessment. This is a brand new product, and we all experienced some growing pains in terms of implementing and considering this model. This is the first implementation of the management track following the research track. I want to emphasize that the SSC really did appreciate the investigations by the Tiger team, and which occurred between the research track and the management track. This was a fairly extensive effort. As noted, one of the key concerns in this assessment is the dome-shaped selectivity pattern, which implies that larger spawning biomass, which is difficult to validate. So we'll spend a fair amount of time talking about that issue in particular. And then also a big concern, of course, overarching concern, is this absence of a fishery independent survey. Progress is being made, but those things aren't, that information is not yet available. Another important point is, of course, that these short-term model projections suggest a rapid increase in abundance when the population is fished at FMSY. You saw in the figures that John presented one of the reasons for that, which is some large year classes from 2020 and 2021 as they enter the fishery. Those are yet to be determined, and that requires some close watching. Next slide, please. So the SSC's deliberations, we resulted in using a coefficient of variation on the overfishing limit of 150%. Why is that? Well, the first thing is that under the criteria we apply, we place kind of a primacy on the availability of the data, as well as the performance of the model. And in both instances, the golden tilefish had some issues. And the first one, as John had mentioned, this is the first application of a very sophisticated state space model to a data moderate species. State space models in their usual applications in the Northeast have been applied to some what most around the world would envy and consider data-rich species. Among these data concerns are that there is an absence of the fishery independence survey. It relies on 3 non-overlapping time series, or well, partially overlapping CPUE series. So there's transition effects, so to speak, in within the model as a result of that changes in the relative abundance indices over time. There's a big gap in the aging data from 1983. The beginning, I'm sorry, that time period is incorrect, but there is a 10-year gap within that period. I think it's 83 to 94. Apologies there. And we also noted that there have been some port sampling declines in recent years, and these have long-term potential effects and short-term ones with respect to the current assessment. Now, the transition period, to address Mike's point, really was before the most recent set of ITQs. And as Mike, there's been a fairly long period, almost 25 years of stable catch recommendations. But in the model, there's a flat top dome, selectivity pattern, and that transitions to a dome shape period, and that commences like in 1987. Now, that's a break point that's really pretty much in the middle of that information gap, that 83 to 94 period there. So as you go from a situation in which the older fish were largely fully recruited to one in which the older fish are now thought to be less available to the fishery, and we'll talk about some of those reasons as we go forward. But there's really kind of an absence of direct evidence for this transition, and it has some fairly significant implications. The model uses random effects on numbers at age and recruitment, as John indicated, but also when you use it for selectivity, that is, when you allow selectivity to sort of evolve over time in response to the data, it has profound changes on estimated stock status, going from not overfished and overfishing not occurring to overfished and overfishing is occurring. So these are sort of things that created some fairly high levels of concern within the SSC. So the next slide, please. We'll talk about the recommendations for the ABC scenarios. The first is one in which the ABC varies annually and is fished at the FMSY proxy. Under that scenario, it goes from the OFLs go from 920 to 1147, and the stocks and the ABCs associated with that nearly double, going from 566 to 1018. One of the hallmarks of this fishery has been that stability in catches, and as Jose so clearly demonstrated, there are concerns about crushing the market, collapsing prices, and all these kinds of things associated with low catches. So the high constant catch scenario is one that's an alternative to that. And what this has done in this scenario, it roughly takes the highest level of average catch that can occur over that period without violating the council's risk policy. So next slide, please. I want to show that, emphasize a very important part of the average scenario here. The first circle bullet there for P star 0.33 refers to the acceptable level of risk consistent with the stock status. The stock status is roughly 75% of BMSY, the column to the right. When you go to a constant average catch, you're increasing that first year catch rate from 566 to 852. That increases the P star to 0.47, which is just under the legal limit, so to speak, of 0.5 for overfishing. So it redlines the population a little bit. It puts additional risk in the early years of that 3-year buffer period. However, you can also see that at the end of the day, or at the end of 2027, the stock status is roughly the same. So you're taking out a little bit early and foregoing some catch later on in this scenario. So that's the underlying basis. Both of these are considered scientifically acceptable by the SSC, and both are consistent with the council's risk policy. So next slide, please. They have a fair number of sources of uncertainty and the usual long list, and they're characterized in the SSC's report. But the kind of overarching kind of concern is that this stock is really strongly influenced by how that selectivity is handled. The solution that the Tiger team came up with was thought to be, an excellent sort of alternative, and was supported by the SSC. These different ways of characterizing how well is the model doing were very helpful, but they're not entirely definitive, particularly with respect to this transition between a flat-topped selectivity pattern prior to 87 and a dome-shaped or more dome-shaped pattern after that. So was considered a reasonable balance between all of these things. And then the other big concern, of course, is these projections rely on this rapid increase in abundance, and that's driven primarily by those as yet fully verified 21 and 2020 and 2021 year classes. There is some evidence in the fishery, and I think Jose may touch on some of that as well. So next slide, please. The SSC had a number of recommendations, both short-term and sort of medium-term. The first of which is to sort of make sure that those incoming year classes that are driving the assessments are well specified, so that we recognize that they're, that we actually see them evolving in there. So that'll be monitoring the length classes. The hook size information and selectivity in those, there were 3 hook sizes used in 2017 and 2 hook sizes used in the subsequent pilot longline surveys. They can provide some information about whether hook size may be driving that process. But there's also, selectivity has a lot of underlying processes. One is just the mechanics of the hook size, but the second is, where can they fish? So as the fishery distribution has evolved over time, and particularly historically, that may provide some additional insights. And currently, of course, there are concerns and issues of effort being distribution changing in response to patterns in the lobster fishery. So we encouraged a review of those historical changes in the fishery, going from J hooks with alternative bait other than squid and to circle hooks. Those things have intended effects in terms of reducing bycatch and improving selectivity. It's important to look at those as well. And then also it was noted that large fish command a lower price per pound because of the head is so large, and the yield from a rack is less. So that's an important part, and we certainly improved we certainly appreciated the contributions from industry on some of these key points. And then finally, it's important to look at how much reliance we might have on this, as we sometimes call it, the cryptic biomass component there. So it's important to kind of sort of balance, what we think is out there with respect to sort of the less observable component of the population that is the larger fish. Next slide, please. In terms of medium-term recommendations, we recommend exploring age-varying natural mortality. This is commonly used in a lot of different stocks nowadays. You'll see it in some of the subsequent assessments during this meeting, and to see if that has any potential utility for solving some of these issues. Selectivity issue we mentioned before. There was some encouragement to try to look at a number of different perspectives on this resource, particularly as we look at that transition. And then finally, there was a recommendation that Ed Hood made related to some recent work on Gulf of Mexico golden tilefish and see if there are any kind of biological assessment features of that assessment that will be transferable to ours. So with that, I thank you for your time, and happy to answer any questions, or we can wait till later. So thank you.
Any questions for Dr. Hare? I mean, not Dr. Hare, for Dr. Rago? Seeing none, Jose?
So now we're going to move into the staff recommendations that are presented in the memo to Chris Moore. Staff recommended a constant average ABC for the next cycle. That was scenario 7 in that document. And that is a quota of 1.1878338 pounds or 852 metric tons. And we also recommended that catch be accounted under management uncertainty. And as I showed you before, that could be done there. And that is a reduction in the catch from the ACT of 54,013 pounds. And that's the average catch for 2022, 2023 that we're using as a projection for what is going to be caught in the next few years. Then a reduction in the catch from each the IFQ fishery ACT and the incidental fishery ACT to account for discards. Staff also recommended no changes to the current recreational bag limit and no changes to the current incidental trip limit. Now, the monitoring committee met right after the SSC meeting, and they recommended catch and landings limits for 2025 through 2027 as recommended by staff. We talk about fishing trends are behaving as previously expected. Constant catch and landings limits equal stability in the fishery. Monitoring committee recommended no deductions for management uncertainty. This is a small IFQ fishery. Ability to closely manage the catch is available to us, and the discards are accounted for and properly deducted from each one of those fishing sectors. So the monitoring committee recommended a reduction in catch from the ACL of 54,013 pounds to account for those projected recreational landings as recommended by staff. The monitoring committee also recommended no changes to the trip limit and no changes to the bag limit either. So here's in a nutshell, that's the bottom line. I have to wait until that appears shows in my computer because I cannot read those numbers from here. But on the top there, where that red rectangle is, you see what the ABCs that are recommended. The staff and the monitoring committee recommended the constant approach ABC. Then next, you see the deductions of projected recreational landings to derive ACT from each one of the fishery sectors. And then the reductions in the green box were applied to account for discards. The bottom line is the IFQ fishery quota is 1,728,590 pounds, and that's just a small decrease compared to what is currently in place. And the incidental quota is about 69,000 pounds, a small reduction of like 8% compared to what is currently in place. So now the discussion for the group is to adopt the 2025-2027 catch and landings limit and adopt changes if needed for all those other management things management measures that we have, specifically the bag limit or the trip limit. Just reminding you that staff and the monitoring committee recommended no changes to either of those. And I think that's all that I have for the group. Yep, that's it. So I'm glad to answer questions if there are any.
Thank you for the presentation. Any questions? Jim Gilmore?
Thanks, Chairman. Just two quick ones. Jose, you said, so it's the stock's not overfished and overfishing is not occurring, but I thought John, when he put up his block diagram, it was actually, there was a slight, little bit into the overfishing. So did I misread that, or is that, what was it? Was there a discrepancy there?
Let me go back to the slides. I don't remember showing that because I skipped that, but. I'm almost there. No, not overfishing. Overfishing was not occurring. It was occurring. Yeah. Okay. So,
Right, but John's block diagram during his presentation actually had a point that was in the overfishing sector.
John here.
Yeah, I think you're referring to that sort of the Kobe plot with the 4 quadrants. Is that right, Jim?
Yeah, John.
Yeah, so that the point estimate is the stock is not overfished but overfishing is occurring. And then sort of the area around that point shows the distribution. So you can think of it as a mountain. Where the point is the top of the mountain. That's where we're estimating we are. And then as you get further away from the point going down the slopes of the mountain, there is a probability that you're in some of that other space, but that probability gets less and less as you get further away from the point and closer to the edges.
Great, thanks.
Yeah,
And follow up just to, Jose, you said there's better data now in the recreational fishery. Do you have an estimate of how many vessels are in the recreational fishery now, and just a trend on it? Is it stable? Is it increasing, decreasing, or what?
we have values on the number of permits that are this froze. We have numbers of permits in the party charter fishery, and we also have numbers of active vessels. I don't know them. I think that I have them here somewhere. I can show them to you in my extra slides. And then we also have numbers on the values on the number of private anglers that have also applied for permits that are reporting via the VTR. However, those values were not used to calculate the recreational landings because it's something that was just currently recently implemented, and we still don't have a good handle. But right here, you can see that in 2023, we have 779 open access charter party Tilefish permits that were issued. I don't have the number of vessels that reported on this slide, but I think that there were, I want to say around 50. I can look at that number and give it to you, but it's a relatively small number compared to the total number of party charter vessels that are operating that have permits. Relatively small number of vessels landing.
I was just interested, is there is it staying stable? I mean, is it an increase or a decrease, or what's the trend on it?
I have not looked at those numbers at a state-by-state basis, but I think that's a good suggestion, and we can do that for the next iteration.
Mike Luisi.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to everyone for all the information and the presentations. Jose, in the memos and in the briefing materials that went around, and I apologize if you said this during your presentation, but there were a lot of references to the traditional way that we would develop ABCs or establish ABCs compared to the constant approach that we used most recently. Was there any feedback from the industry this time around about how that worked this last go around, and whether or not they wanted to maintain that same approach?
So that's the traditional terminology that I adopted that from what the SSC said at the prior meeting when they adopted the ABC that varies from year to year. And then the other one, the other methodology is the average ABC, which is the constant ABC from year to year. So that's what traditional means and the averaging. Traditional is the one that we started doing with the SSC way back, and then eventually they developed this average also methodology to come up with an ABC. The industry highly recommends the constant ABC from year to year because it just provides them with stability. And I think that it really helps them plan long-term planning. They just like that stability because they know what is going to happen every year and they can plan accordingly and do well. So yes, they highly endorse that constant ABC. And I have a slide here that I can probably, it's not going to show it, but perhaps I can show it that. This one here kind of like shows you, this is the big thing. I developed catch and landings limits for under both methodologies here. And you can see that at the end of the day, the quotas change from year to year quite drastically under that traditional scenario. While when you have the constant one, you have consistency. You can see that under the traditional, the one that the ABCs vary from year to year, the final value for the IFQ quota can range anywhere from 1.1 million pounds to 2.1 million pounds. That's a big change. And the incidental fishery, the quota changes from 37,000 pounds or so to 87,000 pounds. That's another big change right there. And we do have it's like managing the incidental fisheries is a lot harder. It's an incidental fishery. So having a very low quota in 2025 could potentially be exceeded if the fishing trends in that fishery continued. So when you look on the red on the left panel there, the blue one, you can see that quotas are, consistent from year to year, and that's just what the industry wants.
Any further questions or comments around the table? Shall we vote?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Jose. And just, going back to the fishery performance report and some of the comments from the for hire and recreational industry asking about, inclusion of language with respect to increasing awareness of the need for a private tilefish reporting permit on the HMS website. Do you have any information or feedback on sort of where that stands? And it sounded like there were several advisors who I know this has been an issue before, just sort of requesting that there might be some additional language that could be put on the HMS permits website, just to make folks aware that as they're applying for permits or renewing permits that, they do actually need a permit for Blueline tilefish.
Yeah, there have been some progress. There have been some progress in that regard. There have been also progress in the way things are specified when private anglers apply for their permit. There have been efforts now. There are efforts that are ongoing efforts for them to be aware that they have to be reporting as well, not just getting the permit, but also reporting. And we're closely working with HMS and others to improve that aspect. So, but we're going to get a detailed review of that progress at the next council meeting.
Any more questions around the table? Any questions from the audience? Comments from the audience? Laurie Nolan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jose, you showed us a slide that said there were 779 party charter permits issued. And I thought you said 50 are active, basically, or reporting. And I'm just wondering if I heard that right, because I didn't realize, yeah, bullet number 2, 779 open access charter party tilefish permits were issued. And then I thought you had said that 50 are active. So I think the key word in these things that we have to recognize is open access. And when you see open access, I think you're always going to have an inflated number of permits issued versus permits active. And I don't think it's any different in the next bullet down. We have 946 permits issued for the private recreational anglers. So why should we assume that there's any more of those permits active in that category than the charter party category? And it gets back to where we're going to collect our data from as far as determining and identifying the recreational catch going forward. And right now with the LPS survey, personally, I feel very uncomfortable using that as a tool to identify recreational catch. When you look up the LPS survey, everything about it is tunas, billfish, sharks, dolphin, wahoo, and amberjack. And nowhere in that list is golden tilefish or blue line tilefish. So I'm very disappointed that we're moving forward using that as a metric at all, because I just don't think it applies to golden tilefish. And here we are with a mandatory reporting system that's reporting some catch. And the description is we're so disappointed in what we're collecting for data. And if we're going to say something like that, I feel like that means in our minds, we have this image of what that number should look like. And I'm just curious about what people think that number should look like, because golden tilefish are caught offshore. They're not a shore fishery. You're going 80 miles, 100 miles to go catch a golden tilefish. And that's a lot of fuel, that's a lot of effort, and it takes a really nice day. So I just want people to keep in mind when we're poo-pooing the results of the mandatory reporting data, and yet we're going to jump on board this large pelagic survey as representation of recreational tilefish catch. I don't see how we can sign on to that one and disregard the mandatory reporting data that's being populated. And again, there's no violations being written. You know, if we had violations being written up and down the coast where you had recreational anglers coming to the dock with golden tilefish that did not have their tilefish permit on board, okay, we got an issue. You know, we're not capturing the catch because people aren't signing on for the permit and they're not reporting. But we don't have any violations. So I just don't think we should poo-poo what's being populated by the mandatory reporting system. And I know the council has intentions of outreach and, you know, investigating all of that. And I'm curious to see what the results are. But it's funny that we have 779 open access charter party permits on the street, and yet only 50 are active. So I think we have less recreational anglers catching tilefish out there in the ocean than people are thinking when they don't like the looks of the numbers being produced. And I guess that was more of a comment than a question, so I apologize. But I do want to just say on Dr. Rago's report, he qualified this as a growing pain process. And I so appreciate that process. I was, you know, paid attention and was involved and attended meetings. And so much work went into all of this. And I have to say how much I appreciate everyone's efforts, because this transition from ASAP to WHAM, I mean, I kept saying wham, it hits you in the face, but it's been tough and so much work has been done. And I personally really appreciate everybody's efforts, from council staff to Science Center to the SSC. Everybody really went all out on this, and I thank you for that.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to make a clarification. I don't want people to take that number 50 and spread that rumor around. There were 34 vessels that landed in 2023, party charter vessels. And sometimes it goes a little bit higher, but in reality, it's a relatively low number of vessels. Thank you.
So even less.
Thank you, Lori.
Can I just, so even less,
Go ahead, Lori.
sorry, like, 50 was, so it's even less than that. I mean, 34 active permits. So if we use the same percentage on the 946, there aren't many players that we're talking about. Thank you.
Jose?
Not to drag this any longer. That's not really my intention. If you look at the number of landings for the last few years for VTR reported, and they have been as high as 7,000, 8,000 fish per year. And some of those years, the number of vessels participating in the fishery is substantially higher. The party charter captains have told us that they plan to have a few trips, some of them a couple of dozen trips per year. And sometimes they just don't happen because bad weather, they don't get the customers or whatnot. So there are people that are intending to fish, but sometimes they're not able to. But that's all that I have, yes.
James Fletcher?
Thank you. Of the 16 incidental permits, can you tell me how many have any landed for the commercial? And then go back, Laura cleared up the 34 vessels for the 776. The 946 permits, I thought they were supposed to report. How many anglers reported on those 946 permits?
Jose?
For the private Tilefish permit, just a very small number. I don't have it in front of me. I don't know if you remember, Hannah, but it's a few dozen individuals are reporting or something like that. Out of the 16 open access commercial incidental Tilefish permits, I mean, I just show you that 150 vessels landed in 2023. So these are open access permits. So a lot of people apply for them. You just have to check the box. But
if I may follow up, those private recreational are supposed to individual permit, if I am correct, and report. And just saying a few dozen, the status that the commercial have been held to, that group being held to a higher standing than just saying a few dozen is not. We need a number. And can we get a number? Thank you for your time.
Jose, did Hannah give you an answer on that?
yes, there were 22 vessels and 37 anglers that reported under the private reporting system. And again, there are some deficiencies in the number of people that are being reporting. And I think that we're going to learn a lot more about what's going on when we have a presentation of the results of the work that is being done at the next council meeting.
Anna Beckworth?
You're killing me. It's Beckwith.
Sorry.
So just a quick question. The private Tilefish permit, is that to the boat or to the angler?
To the boat.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions around the table? John Hare?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to correct the record. I was wrong when I said that a recreational catch per unit effort index had been developed for golden tilefish. It's a recreational catch time series that had been developed.
for golden tilefish. And I just wanted to make sure that correction was made. Thank you.
Any more questions or comments? Hannah, can you put your hand down, please? Dan Farnham?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want the record to reflect I'll be recusing myself from the vote here. Thank you.
Jose, I believe we have a motion that's ready to go up.
Yes, Mary's going to help me with that. Thank you, Mary.
Michael Lisi.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'll go ahead and for discussion, go ahead and make this motion. Move to establish golden tilefish specifications, ABCs, ACLs, ACTs, and TALs for 2025 through 2027 as specified in the table below. There would be no changes to any management measures, any other management measures. And I will, just for the purpose of the record, I do not have a table below on this in front of me, but I'm assuming it's the table we've all been referring to throughout the course of the discussion, but it may be helpful to drop the table into the motion.
Do I have a second? Jim Gilmore? Can everybody see and understand the table that's before us? I don't know if you can see it or not, but everybody understand any problems with the table? Everybody good with it? Understand it? Any discussion on the motion? Mike, do you have anything to add?
No, well, yes. Just for the record, I can't see the table. That even with my glasses, I couldn't see it, but as long as it reflects the staff recommendation for a constant ABC approach, that's the table that I was referencing in my motion. If that's the right table, then we're good to go.
Yeah, the ITQ or the IFQ fishery is 1.728 million pounds, and the incidental fishery of 68,949 pounds. Yep. Jim, do you have anything to add?
No, same comments Mike made. As long as we're referring to that table, I think the monitoring committee made a good summary of it. And as long as we're going with those recommendations, I'm fine.
All right. Any further discussion on the motion? Is there any objection to the motion? Any abstentions to the motion? One, Dan Farnham. Or, yeah, your recusal. Any abstentions? Motion passes with one recusal, Dan Farnham. Thank you, Jose.
You're very welcome.
Let's move on to Blueline tilefish specifications. We need to adopt the 2025 specifications for Blueline tilefish. And review and revise 2025 commercial and recreational measures, if any are needed. Hannah, whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So like we did for Golden, for Blueline, similar outline. First, I'll go over stock status. We'll review some recent fishery performance. We'll go over that advisory panel fishery performance report, and then review the 2025 SSC recommendation and the monitoring committee recommendation. Meeting objectives are to adopt management measures for 2025, so just a single year for Blueline. So for Blueline, stock status, the most recent assessment conducted was CDAR 50 in 2017. This assessment split the stock into a northern and southern region at Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. The assessment determined that south of Cape Hatteras, the stock was not overfished and overfishing was not occurring. However, for the stock north of Cape Hatteras, there was not enough information available to determine stock status, and a data limited toolkit was used to estimate the ABC for the entire region. The next stock assessment for Blueline is currently underway and is again going to be conducted through that CDAR process. So the Southeast Fisheries Science Center is really taking the lead on this one, but we do have Mid-Atlantic representation involved in this process. The updated assessment will be an operational assessment, so it's basically just updating CDAR 50. The stock assessment, there have been 2 working groups formed to help with, diving into the data and stuff like that. One of the working group is a landings data stream working group. This working group has met several times at this point, really trying to get a handle on what recreational and commercial data should be used in the stock assessment. The working group has made some determinations on what commercial information will be included, as well as what recreational headboat information will be included. But we're still having ongoing conversations about the charter recreational information and the private recreational information that will be included. The working group is meeting next month in September, and hopefully we'll have a final decision at that point. There's also been a second working group created focusing on life history data that will be included in the operational assessment. This working group has not met yet, and I believe the first meeting will be in September. The updated assessment is expected to undergo peer review later this year or in early 2025, and should be available for management come next year to inform our management measures starting in 2026. So looking back at when we last set specifications, so in 2021, the council approved multi-year specifications for 2022 through 2024. That included an ABC of 100,520 pounds. And each year, 27% of that ABC was allocated to the commercial fishery and 73% to the recreational fishery. For this fishery, the sector-specific ACLs are equal to the ACTs, and then the respective estimated discards are then subtracted from the sector-specific ACTs to get the total allowable landings, or TALs. For the commercial sector, estimated discards are assumed to be about 1% of total landings, and for the recreational sector, about 2% of landings. For the commercial Blueline fishery, it is open year-round or until 100% of that TAL is landed, and the trip limit starts at 500 pounds gutted weight, and then at the start of the year, and then once 70% of that TAL is reached, it drops down to 300 pounds. As for the recreational fishery, the season opens starting May 15th and goes through November 14th. Just a reminder, this is a newly implemented season as of this year, and it does represent a slight shift from our previous season that was May 1st through October 31st. The recreational trip limit varies depending on mode. We have 3 fish per person for private recreational vessels, 5 fish on federally permitted for-hire U.S. coasted uninspected vessels, and 7 fish on federally permitted for-hire U.S. Coast Guard inspected vessels. So this table shows the ABC and the commercial and recreational catch and landing limits since 2018. Notably, management measures for Blueline have remained largely unchanged since about 2019. However, there were minor adjustments to the commercial total allowable landings in 2021 and again in 2024 due to overages in the previous years. These overages prompted a pound-for-pound payback as required by the Blueline Tilefish accountability measures. You'll also notice on this table there's no recreational landings provided. For Blueline, recreational landings are estimated using an alternative approach, unlike any other mid-Atlantic managed species. And so given these nuances, those calculations are provided later in the presentation. So jumping into commercial fishery performance, landings were low and relatively stable under about 20,000 pounds through 2000 up to 2014. The peak in 2014 really drove the initial involvement of the Mid-Atlantic Council into the Blueline Tilefish fishery. And since the council has established management for Blueline through emergency rule in 2015, landings have remained relatively constant, with small peaks in 2020 and again last year in 2023. In 2023, about 31,456 pounds of Blueline were commercially landed, which does represent an increase compared to 2022. The table shown on the left here shows commercial landings by state in 2022 compared to 2023. As you can see, there has not only been an increase in total landings from 2022 to 2023, but there has also been this slight shift in what states are landing the majority of Blueline. So in 2022, the primary states for Blueline were New Jersey, followed by Rhode Island, Maryland, and then New York. Whereas in 2023, we had a pretty drastic increase in the total landings from Maryland, and then similar landing trends in New York and New Jersey, and a decrease in overall landings in Rhode Island. Looking at commercial landings by statistical area shown in the map to the right, similar to the table, the bulk of the 2023 landings are coming from statistical areas off of Maryland and then Delaware and Virginia. According to CAM's data, the primary gear type reported varies from year to year, but recent past bottom long lines, trawls, and hand lines have really accounted for the majority of commercial Blueline catch or landings. In 2023 specifically, about 55% of landings were reported from long lines, 24% from hand lines, and about 21% from trawls and all other gear types. Since 2000, ex-vessel value of commercially landed Blueline, as shown in the red dashed line, has followed a similar trend as landings, which is that solid blue line. Over the time series, the total value of this fishery has averaged at about $65,000 per year, with a high in 2014 at $580,000 and a low in 2002 at about $672. Looking at price per pound, however, there seems to be this general increasing trend since the early 2000s, with a peak in 2016 at about $3.50 per pound. In 2023, ex-vessel value was over $95,000 at about $3.05 per pound, which is again an increase compared to 2022. And just to note, all values have on this slide are adjusted to the 2023 dollar to account for inflation. So looking at the current fishing year, so this figure was pulled directly from the Garfo quota monitoring website this morning. It shows commercial quota at the top in that solid red line, and the dotted red line represents when 70% of that TAL. So when that trip limit reduces from 500 pounds to 300 pounds. The blue line is the current fishing year, which as you can see is trending similar to that yellow line, which is last year's landings. And then it's trending similar to that green line, which is basically if you take the quota and you spread it equally throughout the year, that would help the commercial sector meet the quota but not exceed it. As shown in the yellow line, so again, that's last year's landings, you could see that the commercial sector did exceed the quota last year, and the fishery was shut down in early September. And because of that overage, there was a pound for pound payback. I also wanted to acknowledge that as of last week, the South Atlantic fishery closed their commercial fishery, which is similar timing to what happened last year. And then as of today, as you can see, current this year commercial landings is just slightly above that 70% of the TAL. So as of today, that commercial possession limit dropped to 300 pounds. So before I move into recreational data and recreational fishery performance, I wanted to note that in mid-July, there was an issue identified in CAMS specific to recreational VTR data. This issue has since been resolved, but I did want to acknowledge that this resolution did result in a large difference between the revised VTR information compared to what was previously provided in the fishery information document and which was presented to the Tilefish AP members. The tables over the next couple slides represent the most recent information, and that information was revised. And so the staff memo and the fishery information document that was provided for this meeting does have all the up-to-date information. But I just want to acknowledge that the Tilefish AP members did not see this. So as many of you know, and as Jose covered, in August of 2020, private recreational permitting and reporting requirements went into effect, which requires all private recreational trips targeting or catching both Blueline and Golden to obtain a free vessel and to submit electronic VTRs. These regulations were implemented with an effort to better understand recreational landings and effort. And especially since, we don't have good recreational data at this point for either of these two tilefish species. I won't go too far into this, but the table here just shows the number of permits issued since 2020, so since the original implementation of these regulations, as well as the number of blue lines specifically reported from year to year. And Jose also already mentioned the efforts that Willie Goldsmith is working on to help improve overall awareness and compliance with these regulations. And I'll just note that in 2023 specifically, we had 946 permits and 541 blue line reported through those permits. This slide shows the available MRIP landing estimates by year and mode. So just like for Golden, keep in mind that intercepts through MRIP are exceedingly rare events. So these estimates often have high % standard of error associated with them. If we look at 2023 MRIP estimates for private rental boats, landings were over 45,000 fish. For charter vessels, over 18,000 fish. And for party vessels, 0 fish. This does represent a decrease for all modes compared to 2022. So just doing a quick comparison, on the previous slide, 541 blue line tilefish were reported through our EVTRs. And here we have 45,000 fish being estimated through MRIP. So pretty rather drastic difference between the two data sources. And then if we look at party charter VTR landings, we see sort of a slightly different trend compared to MRIP. So in 2023, we had about 15,000 fish being reported by combined party and charter vessels, which came from about 317 trips. This table also shows VTR reported discards as well as estimated discards, and estimated discards are calculated using that 2% of total landing, so 2% of the 15,914 fish. So unlike MRIP, looking at EVTR data from the for hire sector, we do see a slight increase in the total blue line landings compared to 2022. So with all of this in mind and recognizing the different recreational data challenges, for the past couple years, the monitoring committee has made the recommendation to use VTR data to estimate party and charter vessel landings, and then the Delphi approach to estimate private recreational landings. Just a reminder, the Delphi approach assumes private recreational landings is equal to 105.16% of annual charter VTR landings. This approach was peer reviewed and accepted as best available science through CDAR 50. And again, CDAR 50 was back in 2017. The monitoring committee has made the recommendation to use this Delphi method since it was developed, and that was back in 2016. They have felt that it's the most appropriate method because of the high level uncertainty associated with the MRIP values and the variation those values create from year to year, as well as the low reporting rates associated with our private recreational VTR data. But I do want to acknowledge that last year and again this year, the monitoring committee did, however, acknowledge that although the Delphi method serves as a great interim solution, while we strive to get better recreational data, they do have some concerns that at this point, the Delphi method may be outdated, and that 105.16% may no longer be appropriate. And that, as we continue our CDAR conversations through the 2024 operational assessment, there may be considerations of a new approach or new data to really monitor recreational landings from this point forward. This table breaks down the comparison of all the different recreational data sources in numbers of fish, as well as the total calculated recreational landings based on that for hire VTR data and that Delphi method, as shown in that last column in the right. Based on the most recent for hire VTR data and the Delphi calculation, so in 2023, we would assume that the recreational sector landed about 22,109 blueline tilefish. So to convert recreational landings from number of fish to pounds, we then use a 3.65 pound multiplier as the average acceptable weight. 3.65 pounds was identified as the acceptable average weight during the initial blueline tilefish mid-Atlantic management discussions, and it's based on data collected from Old Dominion University through a recreational fish carcass donation program. So using this average weight multiplier results in a total recreational landings of about 80,698 pounds. So then if we assume the 2% discards, that would be about 82,312 pounds of blueline tilefish. This estimate does exceed the 2023 ACL by about 12%. However, I'd like to note that the council hasn't received any official catch estimates from GARFO, so this information should be considered preliminary. Before getting into the AP Fishery Performance Report, I also wanted to highlight the South Atlantic Deepwater Longline Survey work that has been done for the past couple years. I've highlighted this survey in the past. It's a cooperative survey with fishermen targeting deepwater snapper grouper species, including tilefish. The objectives of this survey is to generate indices of abundance and collect biological data for several data poor species so that it could hopefully one day be incorporated into the stock assessments. In 2023, this survey was expanded to mid-Atlantic waters to about Wilmington Canyon, and these expanded efforts are expected to occur again this year in 2024. This expansion is critical since it supports collection of blueline throughout their entire range, and we can use this survey as a way to monitor potential distribution shifts in deep water species. So getting into the, before I get into the Advisory Fishery Performance Report, I did want to just again acknowledge that Tilefish AP members did not see the revised VTR data, so they didn't have the ability to really provide any feedback on the potential 2023 recreational ACL overage. So as Jose described, the Tilefish AP met a couple months ago to we asked them a series of questions to get their overall views on the blueline fishery and any factors that may be influencing recent fishery performance. During the call, there were several comments made about bull species, and Jose highlighted a bunch of those, so I'll just kind of quickly go over them. There was general disbelief in the MRIP estimates by multiple advisors, and they did not recommend that such information should be used in the stock assessment nor for management given that high level uncertainty associated with MRIP. Another advisor raised concern about the large pelagic survey. This advisor noted that this large pelagic survey was not designed to target tilefish and so shouldn't be used to monitor tilefish or be incorporated in stock assessments and so on and so forth. And they cautioned future use of the LPS data to track recreational tilefish catch. And this advisor also specifically noted the need to better improve our private recreational VTR data since that was designed specifically to capture tilefish catch and effort. Multiple members also noted the growing interest in recreational tilefish fishing and that this growing interest is driven by switching to tilefish from tuna, marlin, and billfish when those fishing trips are particularly slow. One advisor also highlighted that the advancements in technology has also contributed to this increase. So a lot more private anglers nowadays own electric reels, which they did not prior. And there were also several concerns about the general awareness of the recreational tilefish regulations, both the possession limit and the Blueline season, as well as the permitting and reporting requirements. Multiple advisors also spoke in support of the recent council outreach initiatives and advocated for continued outreach beyond this year. And they also offered to help distribute any media or outreach materials or announcements and things like that. Multiple advisors also advocated for coordinated outreach efforts with NOAA HMS, given the overlap between those fisheries. And then one advisor also shared his surprise upon applying for his 2024 private recreational permit. This advisor noted that while he was applying for the permit and after he received the permit, there was no indication that he was also required to report his catch. He reached out to NIMS staff about this and is advocating for language being added to the permit itself so anglers are aware not only do they need this permit, but they also have to report their catch. And then multiple advisors noted the need for increased enforcement. Bit of a tongue twister there for me. So getting into some of the Blueline specific comments, some AP members noted that although the commercial trip limit is not sufficient for targeting Blueline tilefish, it appears that there may be an emerging directed fishery as indicated by the spike in 2023 landings and the increase in Maryland landings specifically. And one advisor suggested that targeting trips out of Maryland may be more profitable given the closer proximity to these fishing grounds compared to the more northern states. There were also several comments about the early commercial closure in 2023. Some advisors noted that the early closure coincided with some northern fall trawl fisheries that often catch Blueline as a bycatch, and they noted particular concern on the potential impacts this closure may have had on dead discards. Some also expressed frustration towards this early closure, and they felt that the closure was unexpected and noted that the decreased possession limit never went into effect. And some of these advisors noted that tilefish is an important secondary species for them, especially when commercial HMS trips are slow. As for the recreational fishery, one advisor noted the decrease in the for-hire VTR landings and questioned if it was attributed to the, just in general, fewer numbers of vessels targeting tilefish and the general decline in the for-hire fleet. But this was before that new VTR data came out, so it may no longer have relevance since there was actually an increase in VTR data. And then there were also several comments made about the recently modified recreational season. Some for-hire captains out of New Jersey noted particular frustration with this season. They noted that the first 2 weeks of May is important time for them to target tilefish since a lot of other fisheries are closed and weather is getting much nicer offshore. And then for hire captains to the south had kind of the opposite feedback. They noted that they preferred this slightly shifted season because they often catch both blue line and black sea bass on the same trips. And aligning the blue line season better with the black sea bass season helps with minimizing those dead discards. Because of this mismatch between the northern states and the southern states, some advisors did recommend consideration to a regional approach for a season, maybe having a different season in the north compared to the south to help with these potential access issues. Following the AP meeting, there were also a couple comments made afterwards by phone and through email to me. One AP member reached out and expressed concern with the for hire possession limit and noted that 7 fish per person can quickly add up to large amounts. And this AP member was frustrated that with the potential that for hire trips could in some situations harvest as much as a commercial trip. This AP member didn't have a specific recommendation, but suggested a hybrid approach, maybe a numbers of fish or weight limits be implemented, or maybe a sliding bag limit approach. He also noted that there's an inherent difficulty in tracking and managing recreational catch, and that was part of his rationale for a possible weight limit, bag limit. And then 2 advisors also noted that there is an abundance of blue line off the mid-Atlantic coast, and they were generally frustrated with the small amount of commercial quota. And so that brings us to, we had an SSC meeting to talk about the ABC for blue line tilefish, and I will pass the mic over to Paul Rago to go over his report.
Okay. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you very much. Yeah, the blue line tilefish is the sort of prototype data poor stock, and what that means in general is that we have more sources of concern than we have data. The stock status is unknown. There are no reference points for this resource. Recreational catch, as Hannah's so aptly described, is highly uncertain and constitutes more than 70% of the catch. There's a kind of a general issue that it's likely being underreported. One trait or aspect of that is that there's only about a 4% overall reporting rate under the mandatory reporting program. So it's unclear whether that reflects the actual rate or whether it just is, people don't know that it's required. So the MRIP estimates are extraordinarily imprecise and much higher than the mandatory program, and in fact aren't used because the Delphi method developed in 2016 is used as Hannah indicated. It's a constant multiplier, 1.06 times the charter boat catch from the VTRs. So that provides that basis. The total catch uses that 3.65 pounds done at Old Dominion, but during the SSC discussions, there was some discussion which suggested that that's maybe low, maybe more characteristic of closer to shore return catches than there are than some of the offshore catches. And there was some concern that using the historical catch history may be unreliable for a stock that may be expanding its range. And then finally, as noted for Maryland, commercial harvesters may be doing more targeting, and then also more potential targeting on consolation prizes for tuna and swordfish trips. So next slide, please. In terms of sort of signs of progress, next slide. Okay, there. Thank you. There's through the Saddle survey, this South Atlantic Deepwater Longline, the new biological information will be very helpful and help refine those estimates and the contractor report, as mentioned, in October this year will be also very instructive in terms of helping to define what the actual reporting rates are and the potential reasons for that current rate. And then finally, we look forward to the CDAR update in 2025, as well as some suggestion that maybe the data limited tools will be updated as well as part of that process. So the final slide, basically from the SSC, was the next slide, please. The damnation by faint praise. There's no additional information available to suggest that the current ABC is inappropriate. So we recommend continuation of the 100,520 pounds for 2025. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it back to you, Hannah.
Thank you, Paul. So based on the SSC discussions and recommendation, the monitoring committee also recommended status quo for the commercial and recreational catch and landing limits for 2025. Similarly, they noted that because of the lack of any new biological or stock information, the ongoing CDAR discussions, and the high uncertainty associated with the current catch information, status quo seemed appropriate. They also recommended no change to the 2025 commercial and recreational management measures. However, I did want to call attention that although the monitoring committee recommended status quo, they did express similar concern with that Delphi approach again this year, as well as the 3.65 pound average multiplier that's currently used to convert landings from numbers of fish to pounds. And they recommended that next year during the multi-year specification process, we take a deep dive and investigate some alternative approaches or data sources to estimate recreational landings. Some of that might be informed by the updated CDAR assessment, and then also investigate any additional data sources that could be used to convert recreational landings from number of fish to pounds. So before moving on to questions in today's discussion, I also wanted to show annual Blueline estimates since the 100,520 pound ABC was originally put in place, so in 2019. Specifically, this table shows commercial landings in pounds since 2019, as well as estimated recreational landings in pounds. Again, this is based off of that Delphi method and then conversion using that 3.65 pound multiplier. So based on these numbers, you can see that total landings have not regularly exceeded the ABC, and 2023 is really the first year, again, using these methods where the ABC could have possibly been exceeded. And with that, that concludes the presentation. This clicker does not want to work for me, and I could take any questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Hannah. Any questions for Hannah? Anna?
Thank you. Partly because I haven't thought about this in a few years. The stock assessment breaks the line at Hatteras, but obviously Mid-Atlantic manages from Virginia, North Carolina line up. Is there some percentage of the ACL that is shifted over to the South Atlantic? Can you just remind me about that?
Yeah, so what happened the last go around is, and what we'll probably do again this year, there was a subgroup of the SSCs, both the South Atlantic and the Mid-Atlantic, that met. So they took that full ABC and they proportionally split it. Back then we used, so in 2017, the council funded a pilot survey. So we used that proportion to basically inform what proportion should be given to the Mid-Atlantic and what proportion should be given to the South. So come this year, we'll probably do a similar exercise, but we might be able to use the saddle data since that's been updated and that pilot study was just a one-year data source. I believe the percentages are 56 right now, 56% to the Mid-Atlantic and 44 to the South Atlantic.
Michael Lisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I saw either Hannah or Paul, I saw in the presentation, there was a reference to only 4% of fishing activity was being reported. Can you go back and, or one of you go back and just put that into perspective? Is it 4% of the permit holders that are reporting? I would assume that would be what it has to be, other than 4% of what we know is active is actually reporting, but I don't know we can draw that same conclusion.
Yeah, so you're correct. It's 4% of permitted vessels. So Jose mentioned there were, in 2023, there were 22 vessels that reported Blueline or Tilefish in, there were 22 vessels that reported Tilefish, or private recreational vessels that reported Tilefish in 2023. So 22 vessels of the 946 permits. So that's where that 4% is coming in. And that was just for 2023. I think we've had past years with lower than 4%.
Michelle?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Hannah. So with respect to the CAM's error in terms of, applying, I guess, which state Blueline Tilefish landings were coming from. So this was only specific to Blueline, like it didn't affect any other states in terms of catch accounting.
Yeah, so Blueline is unique in that we use for higher VTR data to help with catch accounting and things like that. We don't do that for any other species, at least for the Mid-Atlantic, because we have, MRIP and other data sources that we rely on. So this is unique to Blueline, and you wouldn't notice it in other species because we don't report the VTR data for species.
Mike Penny.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just for context to Mike Luisi's question, I think, we hear the number 4% and that sounds really low, but I think, and this was the point Lori Nolan was making, the number of open access incidental permits we issue, only 10% of them report. And the for hire permits that we issue, only 5% of them report. So 4% of the private anglers reporting, not out of, context, or doesn't seem out of line with the percentage of people that are reporting, from given what we know about the for hire and the incidental commercial permits. So is there some uncertainty there? Absolutely. Is it a huge problem? I'm not so sure it is.
And then Michelle, do you have another question, or just hands are just up?
Well, now that you mention it, maybe I do.
Go ahead.
And so, just looking at the fact that this, this issue with the CAM's accounting and being able to attribute landings by state is sort of what led to there being potentially an overage in the recreational sector. And so the staff recommendation is really based on applying that 3-year average as opposed to the 1-year application, which would typically be how we would, assess an overage, just given the lack of status for Blueline. And so the monitoring, I wasn't able to listen to the monitoring committee meeting, but, the monitoring committee was, clearly okay with that, given some of the issues with the data.
Yeah, I think it was a combination of that and just the general uncertainty with, estimating recreational harvest from year to year, as well as the ongoing CDR discussions. So one thing to keep in mind with the CDR discussions is, as we've been talking about recreational data and what data source should be in the operational assessment, approach was immediately thrown off the table as no longer best available science. So, well, I shouldn't say no longer best available science, but for this upcoming stock assessment. And I think what you're referring to, are you talking about the accountability measures and things like that? So I did crunch the numbers of what that would look like, and I believe it was in the staff memo. So if you took an average of the past 3 years, there was a very, very slight overage by about 1.4%. And based on the regulations and rule, if there is an overage, there is technically a payback based on that 3-year average approach. And it would be a payback of the most recent year's worth of data, so the 12% actually. But because of all the ongoing conversations and uncertainty, there was no recommendation to change anything.
Any questions from the audience? James Fletcher?
Remind me what percentage recreational get of the total catch and what percentage the commercial get of the total catch. And then someone explained to me why we're given numbers I have, there's 16 commercial permits and less than we can't find the number right now, probably less than 22 or 23 recreational permits reporting. Someone tell me why that we are giving the wrong percentage of the quota to a very, very small number. And we have, the landings from the commercial are constrained by the quota. Why aren't we looking at allowing the fishermen to catch more? Because when Mark Cadero did the survey, everywhere that he could get lines to the bottom with tide and current taken into consideration, he found blue line. The question is, why is the council overly constraining the commercial fishing? And like I say, give me the numbers, the percentages that the recreational get of the total catch. Thank you.
Anna, did you catch all that?
Sorry, James Fletcher, you were going in and out. So to answer your first question, I believe was what proportion of catch does the commercial sector get versus the recreational? The recreational, 73% of that ABC is allocated to them, and then 27% is allocated to the commercial fishery. And then I think I heard some vessel, number of permitted vessels or something like that. I think there's more than, I think you said 4 commercial vessels that are permitted. There's more than that. Sorry, I didn't really catch most of that.
Yeah, Jim, when you speak, try and see if you can do, I don't know if you're moving back and forth or something, but you're coming in and out. So see if you can try and sit still and talk.
My point is that we cut back the commercial fishing when this was an emerging industry. And then we gave a disproportionate amount of the resource to the recreational fishing. It's time we look at reapportioning the amount of resource. You've got 1,616 commercial permits. Take whatever number you want to use for the recreational, but there are very few recreational permits landing. Isn't it time that the council consider letting the commercial industry work on this resource? Thank you. James Fletcher, United National Fishermen's Association.
All right, thank you for the comment, James. Any more questions around the table? Michelle Duval.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and sorry, just one last question for Hannah. So I'm just curious if during, the conversations on the operational assessment that's going on through the CDAR process right now, if there's been any discussion of, or if folks are bringing in whatever method was used during the golden tilefish assessment to examine all of those same, recreational data sources, and if there's, any applicability there.
Yeah, we have had a lot of those conversations and we've been exploring all the different data sources. We've been looking at the LPS data, MRIP data, and then, VTR data, as well as the, headboat survey information they have in the South Atlantic. Right now, the conversation is kind of split, whether we want to move forward with using MRIP data to inform the charter and the private recreational information, or if we want to go with the LPS data. One of the issues with Blueline Tilefish, because it's the stock is split at Cape Hatteras, the LPS data is only collected from the Virginia line north. So we've got that sliver that doesn't have the LPS information. So if we were to move forward using that information for the Mid-Atlantic region, we'd have to come up with a way to basically combine, what they have there, which is only MRIP, and then the LPS data, and a way to combine them into one recreational landing source. So that's some of the difficulty with Blueline specifically.
Any more questions around the table? Anna, I believe you have a motion that can go up. Now, different from the blue or from the gold, this is just going to be 1 year specifications. We'll be getting the new CDAR assessment stuff next year, so we'll be doing a 3-year specs next year. But this year, it's just going to be 1 year for 2025. Would anybody like to make the motion? Sonny Gwynn? Second from Peter Hughes. Sonny, you want to go ahead and read it into the minutes?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Move to adopt Blueline Tilefish specifications for 2025. For 2025, the commercial ACL equals ACT equals 27,140 pounds, with a commercial TAL of 26,868 pounds. The recreational ACL equals ACT equals 73,380 pounds, with a recreational TAL of 71,912 pounds.
Would you like to add anything to that, or are you good with that? Peter, would you like to add anything? Any discussion around the table? Is there any objection to the motion? Any abstentions from the motion? Seeing none, the motion passes unanimously. Anna, do you have anything else before us?
Nope, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, it's 3:27. Let's take a little bit of a break. We'll come back at 3:40 and we'll start with our next agenda item.
Wow, he got beat out too. Holy shit.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Start with our next agenda item. Report by Dr. Willie Goldsmith, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation Electronic Monitored and Reporting Grant Program. Willie, whenever you're ready.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to take some time out of your agenda this afternoon to share some information about the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation's Electronic Monitoring and Reporting Grant Program. My name is Willie Goldsmith. I'm with Pelagic Strategies. I'm here on behalf of NIFWF, serving as the field liaison for this program, and I'll share a bit more information about what that means in the coming slides. So for today, just want to share some information about this funding opportunity, share some background on the program, and give some information to you all to take back to your networks about the application process. There we go. Sorry about that. So just to reiterate, this is a current funding opportunity. The RFP is currently live. I'll share some information on that in a bit. And the application deadline is October 2nd. So whether you are familiar with this program or just thinking about possibly applying for the first time this year, I hope you take away from this presentation a bit of background and a sense of what NIFLIF's electronic monitoring and reporting program is all about. Okay, so first off, just some quick basic information about NIFLIF. It was established by a congressional charter back in 1984. It is an independent 501c3 nonprofit, but it does partner heavily with NOAA Fisheries and other federal agencies. And really broadly, it works to leverage public sector dollars with private sector investment, for example, through allying with corporations and private foundations in some instances. As a nonprofit, NIFLIF does not conduct or fund any advocacy, lobbying, or litigation activities. And it really focuses on funding voluntary conservation actions versus efforts to comply with regulatory or legislative requirements. So zooming right in onto this program here, in recognition of the expansion of a technology as a new conservation tool, NIFLIF really began making focused investments in electronic technologies such as electronic monitoring, electronic reporting, and data monetization back in 2015. So it's been about a decade now with these focused investments. And during that time, about $33 million have been awarded to 112 projects in marine and Great Lakes fisheries around the country. And here on the Atlantic coast, about $8 million have been awarded to 33 projects, and I'll give some examples of those in the coming slides. And just to note that the foundations here on the bottom right have supported some of these past investments and awards. So moving into the funding priorities for electronic monitoring and reporting, there are really kind of two major buckets of funding that occur. One is focused on supporting electronic data collection directly, and there are two categories within this. One is on electronic monitoring, so both piloting new approaches to electronic monitoring on vessels and then scaling those to new fisheries or within existing fisheries. By the same token, electronic reporting, again, that same idea, are there new approaches to improving reporting rates, lowering barriers to entry, and increasing ease of electronic reporting, as well as expanding those efforts across fisheries. And then thirdly, and more broadly, is really just driving engagement with fishing communities around the country when it comes to collecting data through electronic means. The second major bucket of activities that this funding opportunity supports is focused on data management and what we broadly call modernizing data management. And really what this focuses on is after data are collected, what are the steps that need to be taken to ultimately make that data usable to scientists and managers? So this priority really focuses on efficiency. So thinking about how we can efficiently QA, QC, and process that data and reduce costs in doing so, as well as ensuring that scientists and managers are able to access any electronically collected data in a timely fashion so that it can be of most relevance and importance to fisheries management. Okay, so I now just want to provide a couple of examples of the types of work that NIFLIF has supported in the past. These are by no means the only kinds of projects that NIFLIF can support, but hopefully this gives you a flavor of the types of projects that have gone on in the past. And I do want to note, I'm just going to briefly mention them here, but if you do want to learn more about these, we do have final reports available for you to review. So again, some quick examples. Over the past decade or so, NIFLIF has funded the Gulf of Maine Research Institute with multiple grants, really focused on piloting and implementing electronic monitoring on large New England groundfish vessels. Some of the goals here include just more efficiently collecting these at-sea data and finding ways to ensure fishermen accountability while also enhancing quota utilization. So there have been efforts to look at EM on the large vessel front, as well as on some smaller vessels as well. So Gettysburg College has worked to pilot electronic monitoring aboard small boats, including a pound net vessel in North Carolina. So when it comes to next steps for, again, this bucket of funding and electronic monitoring, some next steps potentially include addressing costs, and that can entail both reducing the cost of the technology itself, but also reduce time and effort on the part of fishermen to be able to implement these electronic monitoring technologies. And the second side looks at integrating new tools such as artificial intelligence into more efficiently both collecting and analyzing that data. Moving on to some examples of electronic reporting and how NIFWF has supported efforts in the past and as well as some ongoing efforts here. The Cornell Cooperative Extension has been working to transition New York's for hire and commercial fleets to electronic drip reporting. In Maryland, the Oyster Recovery Partnership worked to integrate the commercial shellfish harvest reporting in that state into existing commercial reporting programs for other fisheries. And NIFWF has also awarded a couple of grants to VIMS focused on developing and implementing a recreational and citizen science reporting application called RecFish. Next steps and some key priorities when it comes to electronic reporting. First off, include ease of use. So for example, making sure that the technology is as accessible and user-friendly as possible to fishermen, that when possible, can we find ways to integrate multiple reporting requirements under one umbrella, aspects such as those. And in addition, there's this question around recreational engagement. This came up in a conversation earlier today about tilefish, but just thinking through ways to increase participation and retention in electronic reporting programs to improve the quality of data coming out of that sector. Okay, and lastly, when it comes to data monetization, this tends to be kind of an underlying piece of many projects, but in some cases it can be the explicit focus of the project. Some examples of those that are focused here on the Atlantic coast include a project award given to Team Fish Monitoring that looked at using artificial intelligence to automate New England groundfish discard data. This included using AI to look at species, to count fish, to measure fish, elements of that nature. NIFWF also awarded a grant to Commercial Fisheries Research Foundation in Rhode Island that looked into testing buoyless gear location marking for both mobile and fixed gear fisheries in southern New England. So next steps around data monetization. Again, this is really focused on increasing efficiency and accessibility. How can we quickly make these data usable? And then how can we ensure that these data are readily accessible to the folks who most need to use them? Okay, so hopefully that gives you all a flavor for the types of work that NIFWF's EMR program has supported in the past. And again, the reason why I am here today is because the application window is currently live. The RFP was released in mid-July. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, the deadline for submitting proposals is October 2nd at 11:59 Eastern Time. About $5 million are available in funding. And if you do want to learn more, there's a brief one-pager included in the meeting materials that has a bunch of links and some background information. And then there's also a landing page for the RFP on NIFWF's website. You can see the URL here, bit.ly/EMR RFP 2024. Just want to briefly mention some elements of what really makes a strong proposal here for this funding opportunity. The first one is partnerships. So the program really looks for partnerships both at the data collection level as well as at the data implementation level. So the data collection level, certainly having fishermen engaged from the start who are interested in improving the quality of the data coming out of their fisheries. So really looking for those partnerships coming from the water. And then also seeing that the folks who will ultimately be using and applying those data, whether that's at the federal, regional, state, or other level, is really a key component of a strong proposal. In addition, having the strong technical elements present, so folks who have the expertise and the familiarity to really integrate these data or integrate these fisheries into electronic technologies is a key element as well. And then lastly, and we can certainly talk more offline about this if folks are interested, the need for preparedness when it comes to finances and being prepared to accept federal funds. So I'm happy to provide some more details on this. But just for example, I'm making sure that audits and any other financial paperwork are in order. And if it's possible that you, as an entity, are interested in applying but don't necessarily have those resources, partnering with a more experienced organization might be beneficial. Okay, and lastly, again, just to reiterate who I am and why I'm here. I am serving as a field liaison for this RFP cycle. I was also a field liaison for last year's RFP. My role as a field liaison is to help spread awareness of the opportunity, as I'm doing today, to really work to identify prospective applicants. So certainly there have been many successful applicants in the past, but the idea of trying to get some new ideas into the conversation as well. And then to help those folks brainstorm ideas and partners, thinking through who might also be interested or who might be an interesting resource to collaborate with on some of these efforts. And then lastly, really to serve as a resource when it comes to the application process, as there are a number of pieces that could go into this. As a past NIFWF EMR grantee, certainly available to help folks navigate that process. And again, my information is there on this slide. All right, so that's all I have for you today. I appreciate again the time this afternoon. Certainly available to take any questions or to talk offline. I'll be here for the rest of today. If you do have any other questions you'd like responses to, Gray Redding is the program manager for the Fisheries Innovation Fund at NIFWF, under which the EMR program sits. My information is also up there, as well as that link to the RFP. So thanks again. I will take any questions if we have some time.
Thank you very much, Willie. Any questions? Michelle Duval.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Willie, for the presentation. Just out of curiosity, how are the priority fisheries set? You know, the information sheet notes the Gulf, the New England groundfish fishery, the West Coast groundfish fishery, Alaska halibut, and I feel like those have been priority regions for the last couple go-rounds of this grant cycle. So can you provide any detail on how those are identified?
So I may have to get back to Gray on the mechanics of how those were identified initially. I do want to note, though, that while those have been kind of key focal areas, they're by no means the only areas to which grants are restricted. There's a history over the past several years, in particular, of funding awards all around the country. So can certainly provide some background offline about kind of how those priorities were decided upon, but just want to note for everybody that any fishery that occurs in the U.S. Marine or Great Lakes waters is eligible to apply, and happy to chat more about any ideas. Thanks for the question, though.
Michael Weesey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Willie, for the presentation. It's good to see you. It's been many years since I think we've crossed paths, but it's good to see you at the table. Just a quick question for you regarding the $5 million that is available. As far as you know, is there any predetermined or any allocation of that $5 million that would fall into the categories of recreational versus commercial data collection? Do you know of any, or is everything kind of open for discussion? And I may have a follow-up depending on the answer. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Mike. The short answer is no. So there's not really any set allocation on which types of projects. I think, again, part of my role here is to ensure there's a broad swath of different types of projects coming in. I do want to note, you might see that the funding amount or the award number is a bit higher than in past years. There is one small element of the RFP that I believe is reserved for some efforts in the Gulf of Mexico and the state permitted shrimp fishery. So that's why that number is a bit higher. But outside of the rest of the most of that pot of money is reserved for the general electronic monitoring and reporting program. And within that, there's no set allocation, commercial, recreational, reporting versus monitoring versus data monetization.
Yeah, thanks for that. And the reason I asked is that I think in light of the discussion we just had earlier this afternoon regarding the need for recreational information, there, over the years, you continually see and hear about advancements in the data collection programs for the commercial, the industry, which is great, because we need good information there too. But I feel like over the past decade, let's say, it's just starting to get very lopsided, so that the commercial industry is so heavily managed and scrutinized to the degree that they are, regarding reporting, yet we have fisheries, highly specialized fisheries like tilefish fisheries, where it doesn't seem like with whatever we try, we're still having a difficult time collecting recreational data. And, hopefully maybe somebody out there is listening and would like to try to emphasize or put some kind of focus on that, on the recreational element, that I know that it leaves a lot of people questioning how we work with those data as we make decisions on the management side. So that's all. Thank you.
Any more questions? Anyone from the audience? Seeing none, thank you very much, Willie, for your presentation. Our next agenda item will be a presentation by Brandon Muffley, the NOAA Fisheries Ecosystem-Based Fisheries Management EBFM Roadmap. We're going to review and provide comments on the revised EBFM Roadmap to be included in a comment letter, which is due by the end of the month. Brandon, whenever you're ready.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thanks for the opportunity to present to you today. Thanks to NOAA Fisheries for extending their comment deadline. We were originally supposed to have comments to them by the end of July, and they extended it to the end of August. So it gave us the opportunity to bring this forward to you all today for consideration. I would just note, EBFM tends to get people's eyes to gloss over and start thinking about dinner and all of those other sorts of things. And maybe a little bit more, not as concrete as some of the other actions that you'll take this week. But, the NOAA Fisheries and the Council has invested a lot of time and effort into advancing ecosystem considerations. And so, it's a lot of our own resources. I think we've made a lot of advances along with NOAA Fisheries. And so I think it's a really important component. And part of that is there's a workshop at the end of this week that continues that sort of work, looking at the climate, ecosystems and fisheries initiatives that we all are going to work and talk to with NOAA Fisheries about. So it's something that's going to continue to be an important topic for us. So I think it's important to bring this topic in front of you all for your feedback. So just a general overview of what I plan to cover. I'm going to give a really high level overview of the EBFM roadmap. It's not the council's document, it's NOAA Fisheries, but I do want to give you at least some context, what's in the roadmap and where our comments came from. And then we'll review the draft comments that staff came up with, see if you all agree with any of those comments, have any additional comments that we want to provide. And I'll take any of that feedback and we will include it for a comment letter that's due by the end of the month. And so just quickly, the original EBFM roadmap was initially developed in 2016. This was at the same time that NOAA Fisheries developed their EBFM policy. And since 2016, NOAA Fisheries has acknowledged that a lot of progress has been made since then. And some of the things that they cite in terms of their advances since then have been the development of ecosystem status reports or state of the ecosystem reports for most regions, development of climate vulnerability assessments, the development of fishery ecosystem plans or similar guidance documents for nearly all the regions, the development of risk policies, scenario planning, climate-ready fisheries management. So a lot has happened at NOAA Fisheries level. And I would also note that a lot of those things that NOAA Fisheries cites in terms of that have happened since 2016 have also happened here in the Mid-Atlantic. We completed our EAFM guidance document at the same time in 2016, and we've made a lot of progress as well. Many of those things that were noted by NOAA Fisheries, we've done here in the Mid-Atlantic. So I think it's, speaks to a lot of the work that's gone on in cooperation with NOAA Fisheries. And so the roadmap is really the way NOAA Fisheries structures lots of their documents. They have a guidance policy, so they have their EBFM policy, and then they have a technical guidance document, which is essentially what the roadmap is. And it outlines the specific actions that it plans to take to implement their EBFM policy. And I just put in how NOAA Fisheries defines EBFM. I'm not going to read through it. There's a lot of words there, just to point out that in all of those words, there's a lot that needs to happen when you move towards ecosystem-based fisheries management. So, recognizing the physical, biological, economic, and social interactions and looking at all of those competing interests and how you best balance all of those interests is really what the heart of EBFM is getting to. And so with something that's that comprehensive, there's a lot that goes into their roadmap and their risk policy. So there's a lot of things within this document. And the roadmap is really setting the types of work that they're going to do over the next 5 years in order to implement their EBFM policy. So some of the areas that they highlighted in the revisions in the 2024 roadmap are making more concrete linkages between their EBFM work and the other NOAA initiatives that are taking place, improving the connections between science and management. EBFM is not just a scientific exercise, it's meant to inform management, and so making those connections much more specifically in the document. And then to better integrate habitat, protected resources, and socioeconomic sciences within that. So it's more than just the biology. We need to be looking at these other components as well and making sure we're integrating, making sure NOAA Fisheries is integrating those things within their EBFM policy and roadmap. And so these are their 6 guiding principles or their guidelines for implementation of the EBFM policy. I'm not going to go into great detail onto any of these, but I think it's important to show these because they provide some context for the comments that we have. The guidelines are outlined in their policy, and then they have them within the roadmap because the roadmap is intended to implement the policy. And so I found their figure on their EBFM guidelines really informative. It's helpful. It's very similar to other ecosystem sort of diagrams that you'll have in terms of how the information flow would go into the management process. It's very similar to the EAFM decision process that we have, and it starts off with implementing ecosystem planning. So that's really what are the goals and objectives you're looking to accomplish through ecosystem level planning. Next would be to advance your understanding of the ecosystem processes. So that's really getting at what's the science needed to advance those goals and objectives. Third would be to prioritize vulnerabilities and risks to the ecosystems and their components. So really determining what are the challenges. This could be something that would happen through a risk assessment. Understanding what are the areas most at risk and what might you want to do to deal with those. Guideline number 4 is explore and address the trade-offs within an ecosystem. Again, this is something that you may want to do through management strategy evaluation, where you would look at those trade-offs of potential management options that you're looking at. How would you go about implementing something? To then go to step 5, which is actually implementing ecosystem considerations. So what are the management changes you would actually do to implement and account for ecosystem factors? And then step 6 would be monitoring and making any adjustments given the information that you have. So again, this is the diagram shows this circular loop. It has these 6 different steps, but you don't have to necessarily go in sequence in order to make advances. If you have one piece of information, you could move around. They are interrelated clearly, but you don't have to sort of step through this in specific sequence in order to make advances of the policy. And so there are these 6 guiding principles, and with each of those guidelines, there are 3 goals associated with each of those guidelines. So there are 18 goals included in the roadmap. And then within each goal, there's 1 to 3 action items that NOAA Fisheries has identified. So there's 37 action items that are laid out within the roadmap. So that's my overview, really quick, of the roadmap itself. And now I will get into some of the comments that staff have come up with after reviewing the roadmap. So I've binned these into 2 different areas. One is sort of our overall general comments about the entire document, and then I'll get into some specific comments regarding specific goals or action items that we may have had. Certainly, we support and encourage the continued development of EBFM and moving along with that. There's been a lot of positive work that's happened, and we continue to support that work. And we think that this implementing the EBFM policy should continue. And it's mentioned in the document, but I think it probably could be highlighted more that the roadmap needs to be sufficiently broad to allow for regional flexibility and implementation. No region is the same. There are different data issues, there are different challenges, there are different climate factors that each region is facing. And so just ensuring that while you want a national level policy or roadmap, that there is flexibility for regional implementation and consideration. And to that point, we want to make sure that, again, the Mid-Atlantic Council does not have specifically an EBFM sort of process. You all have chosen to go with an EAFM route, but many of the components in the EBFM roadmap are included in our guidance document, and we've made a lot of very similar advances within our EAFM guidance document. So making sure that there's the space for us to continue to work within implementing our EAFM guidance document and having the collaboration and partnership with the regional office and the Science Center is going to be critical to do that. Second, there are a number of places within the roadmap that talk about resources, data streams, modeling efforts that are going to be needed to implement and move forward with the roadmap and in the EBFM policy. We certainly support those advancements and resources, but those should not come at the expense of the core data collection and stock assessment needs. We've talked about earlier today about declining port samples and how critical that is for our tilefish assessments. There are other areas where we are seeing some erosion of our fundamental data that goes into stock assessments. So while we support advancing EBFM, it shouldn't come at the expense of the core data collection needs. Continuing on with the overall comments, there's some discussion about reducing duplication and finding efficiencies, and I think they specifically talked about under the original roadmap, each regional office and science center was required to develop an EBFM implementation plan. And in this roadmap, they are talking about getting rid of those implementation plans and not create a whole nother document, but include EBFM milestones within their strategic planning document. So the regional office and the Science Center both have strategic planning documents. I think one of them was recently updated. I think Garfo's was recently updated. And so including those EBFM milestones within those strategic planning documents is where EBFM would get folded in. And the comment really here is just to encourage that those milestones be developed with the council and other management partners so that we're sort of all working in the same direction to find and identify what those EBFM milestones should be. And then our last overall comment that I'm going to bring up here is that the roadmap talks about programs and initiatives and funding sources and websites and all of these sorts of things that cut across not just NOAA Fisheries, but across NOAA. But it's really not clear how and where those other programs and initiatives are linked to the roadmap and specifically to any of the action items. Again, they're all mentioned in there, but it's really not clear how those initiatives or where those intersections actually take place. And this was identified as a goal of the roadmap update, but it's still not clear in terms of making those connections across all of these different initiatives. And again, there's a lot of reference to these different initiatives or programs like the Integrated Ecosystem Assessment Program or CEFI, the workshop that we have later this week on the Climate Ecosystem Fisheries Initiatives. There's lots of, and I don't mean this negatively, there's just lots of jargon within the document itself that if you're not familiar or if you're not in NOAA Fisheries, it's not clear as to what those things are actually referencing. And so we offered that maybe an appendix, not a detailed description of all of those sorts of things, but maybe some short descriptions and some greater integration of how those other programs and initiatives within NOAA Fisheries or across NOAA are actually going to work and support some of the roadmap action items. All right, so into the specific comments. These two comments are somewhat related. So action item 1A1 is guidance or assistance in the development and execution of fishery ecosystem plans or other strategic planning documents. And so this would be our EAFM guidance document that's relative to our council. But we just wanted to flag here that there are a lot of Inflation Reduction Act projects that are out there that are really going to advance council's fishery ecosystem plans or guidance documents. And so there's going to be a lot of collaboration that's going to be required. And we're hopeful that NOAA Fisheries, the regional office and the science centers are going to be supporting those efforts to make sure that those IRA projects are successful. And related to that, Goal 1C talks about facilitating EBFM coordination across NOAA Fisheries and its partners. So not only do we have all of these IRA projects that are taking place, there's other activities within each of the councils, EAFM or EBFM or fishery ecosystem plans that's taking place. But it's not clear within the document itself how some of those coordination efforts are actually going to take place. Just given all of the work that's happening just within the 3 Atlantic Coast councils, just making sure that there's a lot of communication, coordination, and collaboration taking place. So maybe some teasing out how some of that collaboration and communication will take place, I think would be beneficial. Let's see. Yeah, I thought I skipped one. Okay. Goal 3A, action item 3A1, which is conduct climate vulnerability assessments for living marine resources, habitats, and coast communities, and identify on-ramps for management. And so climate vulnerability assessments have been super valuable. We've used them quite a bit within the Mid-Atlantic. The Northeast Fish Stock Climate Vulnerability Assessment by Dr. Hare and others is utilized within our SSC's OFL-CV decision criteria. We utilize it in our EAFM risk assessment. And so these documents are really supportive and really informative to a lot of the work that we do. But we recommend prioritizing and updating that Northeast Fish Stock Climate Vulnerability Assessment. Again, that was done in 2016 by Dr. Hare and a number of others. And we actually just talked about this last week. We had an SSC ecosystem and economic subgroup meeting talking about our State of the Ecosystem report in some areas. And again, given the utility of this climate vulnerability assessment, there was some discussion that it's getting to feel a little bit outdated, particularly since it's a static snapshot of looking at the vulnerability of our stocks. And so there was a recommendation to maybe prioritize this and updating this vulnerability assessment, recognizing it's a lot of work. Maybe there are components of the analysis that could be informative or maybe become more dynamic that could change over time to make sure that they are useful for management over the long run. And then this comment, it's the same comment, but it crosses 2 different goals. So goal 4B is analyze the trade-offs with respect to optimizing benefits from all fisheries within an ecosystem. And goal 6B, which is evaluate coastal fishing communities and well-being. So again, overall support for these 2 goals and the increased use and prioritization of economic and community information. within assessment models, within our ecosystem models, and within the management process, so we fully support that. But the language that's in the existing roadmap seems to really focus on, or at least implies, that it's generally targeted towards commercial fisheries and communities. And we just want to make sure that recreational, economic, community, and well-being information is being considered and included. And so maybe just pulling that out or highlighting that, I think, would be beneficial. Goal 5A is develop and monitor ecosystem reference points. And again, we fully support the movement towards ecosystem reference points. We think it's a desirable goal, and there's actually a lot of work taking place within the Mid-Atlantic. Again, SSC Ecosystem Work Group is looking at ecosystem reference points. It's included in our State of the Ecosystem report, looking at ecosystem overfishing, or whether or not we can define whether or not the ecosystem is overfished or not. So those are all very desirable goals. But that will require potentially a significant change to our management and governance framework, looking at, if we were to implement ecosystem reference points, how will we go about doing that? You're looking across the ecosystem, across stocks, but there's really no mention of these considerations, how you would actually go about doing that, or thinking through making sure that we're having partner collaboration and considering the development of these ecosystem reference points. So while it's a very scientific issue, the outcomes and application of ecosystem reference points has a very big management implications. And so thinking through those and pulling that out a little bit more within the roadmap would be beneficial. And we'd also note that, there are a lot of resources and advancements that are going to be needed to get us to ecosystem reference points, but maybe as a step to get us there is, just making advancements within our single species stock assessments. We do not have dynamic reference points for many of our single species. We're only beginning to include environmental covariates within our stock assessments. So maybe that's an interim step that maybe we want to focus some of our efforts to make sure that work continues versus going all the way to ecosystem reference points. I think this is the last comment that have here. So goal 6A is to evaluate ecosystem level measures of resilience. Again, general support for the concept of this goal and developing resilience definitions, what those measures and metrics might be. But some of this felt similar to the NIMS 304F, the NOAA Fisheries Climate Governance Policy that you all spent a lot of time talking about, that Chris would bring up to you all quite a bit. A lot of those sort of metrics and definitions, again, getting back to an earlier comment, while this is a national level policy, it really needs to have regional specific sort of flexibility, because measures or metrics for one region are likely not going to be the same for another region. So just emphasizing that we need to think about these at a regional level and not just come up with some specific metrics that would apply across the country. And also encourage the development of these metrics in collaboration with management partners, and in order to ensure that we're meeting our management objectives for resilience. There really isn't any discussion within this specific goal about identifying those with management partners, and I think that's really critical in order to be successful, to identify what those definitions and measures and metrics should be. You need to have management partners identifying what those objectives are in order to come up with the criteria. So those weren't all of the comments that are in the memo as part of your briefing materials, but those were some of the bigger ones that I thought might be of most interest to the council to talk about here. So really the goal for today is to provide any feedback on the draft comments that you heard of. Are there any new or additional comments that the council may have in regards to including in a comment letter? Are there comments that staff came up with that you don't support and we should remove from a comment letter? So I'll take your feedback that you have today, and we'll wrap up a comment letter and get it submitted by the end of the month. With that, Mr. Chair, I'll take any questions or listen to your feedback.
Thank you, Brandon.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, John.
Thank you. I asked the gentleman on slide 3, under the outlines actions intended to implement. The last part of that italicized language says, and seeks to optimize benefits among a diverse set of societal goals. That's really nebulous. Can you be a little more informative about that? I really, you talking about climate change, talking about equity? I don't know what that means.
Well, I don't know if NOAA Fisheries, this is NOAA Fisheries' definition of EBFM to them. I mean, I can speak to it. Maybe, I would agree that societal goals are pretty broad, you know, I mean, to me, that would include, that could go beyond just fisheries goals, right? And thinking about things more broadly, but I don't know if John or Mike have any specific comments to the actual EBFM definition that's included.
Again, I'm not trying to cause any trouble. If we're going to look at this, we kind of need to know where we're going.
John Hare.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly as Brandon portrayed it. It's to look at sort of the diversity of the goals that we have for the ocean. So we have commercial fishery goals, we have recreational fisheries goals. That's where much of our attention has been for a very long time. We now, have offshore wind goals. We have shipping and security uses of the ocean. So how are we sort of fitting the fisheries goals and fisheries management into that larger context of multiple ocean users?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was a good answer.
Michelle Duval.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Brandon, for that overview. I am very supportive of the draft comments that you put together and like all the points that you've raised. I agree with that. I think, the only thing I might add is that I think under, goal 2A, which is about, or goal 2 in general, just to advance our understanding of ecosystem processes, I think sort of sprinkled throughout there are some, references to other ocean uses, including offshore wind. I would just encourage, us to think about, and for NOAA Fisheries to think about, coordinating with other groups that are working on those things. So for example, the Responsible Offshore Science Alliance, which has developed a pretty cool fish forward database that's trying to collate all of the existing, offshore wind related research and questions that are going on. So it seems like, that type of coordination could be very helpful under that goal. Thanks.
Jim Gilmore.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And Brendan, that was a good presentation. But I noted your opening line that people's eyes glassing over. And I think part of the problem with that is that, now years into this, I don't think we have a consistent definition of ecosystem-based management. And depending upon the group you're talking to, it's different. So if I can focus a couple of things I think might be helpful. So first, I think the real, hey, and Bob Beal just walked in. What a great timing that. I was going to use an ASMFC example that in Menhaden, we actually was the first fishery where we got ecosystem-based reference points. So it kind of put in a practical application to it. So essentially, we developed reference points that were going to have ecosystem-based functions. So essentially, your reference points were going to include, things that were going to be on just the fishery itself. So so that I think now I can understand it a little bit better. But now we go back to this, and this has this, we're going to fix the planet type like stuff still, and it's still coming back. That I think what would be helpful is what's the end goal of this, and this goes back to the service. What are we going to eventually use this for? And could we put some actual examples of how we would use this down the road? And as a hypothetical. When I was in graduate school a few years ago, my work was on bluefish, but it was some relationship between weak fish, bluefish, striped bass, and their ecosystem functions. And the question was, if we're going to adjust biomass of those different species, is that something that we can start using ecosystem management for? What's going back to, I think, goal 4B, analyze the trade-offs with respect to optimizing benefits from all fisheries within the ecosystem. So if that's a goal, which is quite a lofty goal, Are we going to get to a point where we would understand the interrelationships of all the species we manage, do multi-species ecosystem management, and essentially set reference points that are going to balance those different populations? Now, I think we're decades away from that actually happening, but still, is that the goal we're shooting for, or is there something different? Do I have this completely, is there a different goal that NOAA Fisheries has for this? So again, some examples in the document would be helpful as to, in a few years from now, how we would actually be using this. Thank you.
Joe Semino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Brandon. I'm happy to say I fully support all the comments. Agree with Jim about 4B and that being a very lofty goal. And I really appreciate you pulling out 6B because I do think that that's a very important one to consider recreational fisheries. And I think all states, need to do that at some level. So to that end, I think there's that kind of regional specificity there, that we're all going to have some different issues on what that means to us. And so I just want to say that I think that might be one of the most important comments in here, is to make sure that it's general enough to allow that. I think, a lot of work was done with the climate scenario planning stuff that has really brought all three of us together. As I sit next to my New England and South Atlantic partners, I think that is going to play into this. And I think that's great. It's great to see South Atlantic sitting with us on some of these discussions, because we've had a much closer relationship with New England on a lot of this stuff. And, lastly, just the mention of the IRA stuff. I know that is going to be a challenge, and I hope that coordination is there, especially with the timing of funding and stuff as things come in and we all try and figure out how to make that work for us in the near future. So thanks. Thank you.
Any more comments for Brandon? James Fletcher.
When we talk about the ecosystem, the National Fishermen's Association over the last 20 years has talked about pharmaceuticals, pesticides, and man-made chemicals in the environment. The man-made chemicals can include nano and microplastics. Until NOAA and the council starts addressing what's in the ecosystem that is man-made or man put in there, this is not going to accomplish anything. And if you look at the situation from north to south, the southern part, we say it's global warming moving animals north. There's a possibility exists. Pollution and the microplastics going south have caused the fish to move north. If we're going to address the ecosystem, somebody has got to define exactly what an ecosystem needs to be addressed. And I do not see this doing it. But United National Fishermen's Association thanks you for your time.
Thank you, Jim. Any more comments for Brandon? Seeing none, Brandon, can you get everything written up? You're good to go. All righty, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Let's go with our last agenda item of the day. Northeast Trawl Advisory Panel update by Hannah Hart. We're going to receive an update on recent NTAP activities, including a summary of the most recent NTAP meeting and any developments related to the industry-based survey pilot project. And whenever you're queued up and ready, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So as Mr. Chair indicated, I'll provide an update on the Northeast Trawl Advisory Panel, also known as NTAP. So on July 11th, NTAP met in New Bedford, Massachusetts. This was an in-person meeting. We had a rather full agenda, so we weren't able to actually go through all of our agenda items, and we didn't necessarily have discussion on all of them because we ran out of time. But we got some updates from the Science Center on the spring 2024 surveys, as well as updates from NEMAP. We also received a presentation on a constraining or restrictor rope used on Norway trawl vessels. And then we received several presentations on different industry-based trawl surveys that are happening around the country, and we dove into that discussion. And then we also had an update from offshore wind, specifically on inter-array cables and export cables. And then at the end of the meeting, we did have an opportunity to tour a Vineyard Wind terminal where they stage their windmills. So just for the center updates, I'll briefly provide some of the updates that the NTAP received. So on the spring 2024 bottom trawl survey, they completed 367 out of the 377 planned stations. Some of the reasons why not 100% of the stations were complete included some weather impacts, and then there were a couple issues with fixed gear, but they did note that there were fewer issues with fixed gear for this survey compared to previous ones. The center also provided an update on Pisces. So for just a reminder, there's been conversations about possibly using the Pisces, which is the sister ship of the Bigelow in the south, to fill in for the Bigelow when it undergoes its midlife retrofit. And that's in 2027 through 2028. So the update included, that NIMS staff as well as OMAO staff has a working group that's meeting monthly to kind of talk through what needs to be done in order to make this happen. And then there is a shakedown cruise planned for November of this year following the fall bottom trawl survey. For the Gulf of Maine bottom longline survey, they completed 100% of their stations, and they noted that this data has recently been incorporated into multiple stock assessments, and they're using this information in some modeling and other research efforts. So that was some positive news to hear. As for the NEMAP updates, so focusing again on those spring 2024 surveys, so the Maine, New Hampshire inshore trawl survey completed 100 out of the 120 planned stations, and they noted that they've caught more black sea bass during this spring 2024 survey compared to any other year or season. The Massachusetts trawl survey completed 100% of their planned stations, and they noted a large tow of northern sea robins south of Nantucket. And then the Mid-Atlantic, Southern New England nearshore trawl survey completed also 100% of their planned stations, and they noted that the top species by count included butterfish, longfin squid, and scup. So the NTAP received a presentation from the Institute of Marine Research out of Norway, focused on the constraining or restrictor rope they use when they conduct their bottom trawl survey. So this is similar to the restrictor rope that was used on the Durana R during the NTAP rope research. And on this slide, there's a diagram of what that Norway constraining rope and trawl looks like. I do want to highlight, though, that Norway, they attach their constraining rope at the wraps about 100 to 120 meters before the doors, and the NTAP restrictor rope research attached the restrictor rope at the actual doors. So there's a difference with the methodology and how that's operationalized. During the presentation, it was highlighted that the restrictor rope or constraining rope used in Norway helps to standardize trawl geometry for consistency between depths at about 50 to 600 meters. It addresses issues with wing spread, bottom contact, and door lifting force, and it reduces variability in door spread and sweep angle. And they also use identical trawl doors across all of their vessels to maintain spread power and prevent overspreading. They also noted some operational details, including that the constraining rope is placed above the trawl doors, as I mentioned, to avoid any potential fish behavioral effects. And they conduct regular shakedown periods to confirm that they are placing the constraining rope at the correct distance. They also noted that the constraining rope has successfully demonstrated reduced variation in door spread. And so as you can imagine, there was a lengthy Q&A session and discussion following this presentation, especially since NTAP has expressed an interest in using the restrictor rope as we continue our discussions on the industry-based survey in the New England area. There were several questions about operational specifics and the initial research done prior to actual implementation of this constraining rope. And the presenter provided us with those, that background information and some papers. So if anyone's interested, they are in the full meeting summary, but I could also send those along. There was also a lot of discussion generated by the difference in where the Norway places this constraining rope versus where the NTAP placed the restrictor rope. And some of that was related to the possible impacts on fish behavior and having it attached to the door, possibly, scaring fish away or hurting them and things like that. And then there was also some discussion on, so we learned that this constraining rope is used in Norway and then also Russia, I believe, but it's not used among all of the ICES member countries. And so there was some conversation as to why, and it seemed like it was more related to operational challenges and other countries' vessels not being properly set up to attach and remove the constraining rope as they're bringing in the trawl. So following the constraining rope discussions, the NTAP received, as I mentioned, multiple presentations from various groups that are currently conducting trawl surveys on industry platforms. This was an opportunity for NTAP to really learn more about some of these long-standing surveys as we continue our conversations, and there's that general interest in the industry-based survey here in the Northeast. These presentations included one from the Northwest Fisheries Science Center on their groundfish surveys, another from the Alaska Fisheries Science Center on their cooperative trawl survey, and a third from NEMAP, from VIMS based on the NEMAP surveys. Each presentation went over the background of each survey, survey design, the vessels used throughout the years and the consistency of vessels as well as new vessels that come into play, the gear used, standardization techniques they use across tows and the multiple vessels, the data collected and how it's used, as well as the different pros and cons associated with these types of surveys. For the sake of time, I won't go into too much detail about the individual surveys, but there are presentations on each survey posted on that July 11th NTAP meeting page on our website, so you can refer to those, or there's also additional information in the meeting summary, which was provided as briefing materials. These presentations generated much discussion among meeting participants, which really evolved around like survey operational specifics, like impacts of tow time length, the vessels being able to adapt to new technologies as new technologies come into play, the challenges associated with rotating vessels or consistent vessels, and so on and so forth. There's also some conversation on the use of fixed stations versus randomized sampling design. So we dove into a lot of conversations, and it was really an opportunity for NTAP to really get an understanding about these industry-based surveys, how they're operating, their successes and things like that to help inform our continued conversations. And then the last topic that NTAP had on the agenda was offshore wind. So we received 2 presentations from Vineyard Wind specific to the inner array cables as well as the export cables. Both presenters provided background information on these types of cables as well as some graphics of the cables and the cable arrays, like what they look like, and then they went through the installation process of each. Given the sheer number of topics we had on the agenda, as well as the lengthy discussions we had for each agenda item, we unfortunately ran out of time to get into any sort of in-depth conversations. So I'm sure we'll pick this conversation back up at our next NTAP meeting. And then following the Vineyard Wind presentations, As I mentioned, NTAP also had an opportunity to actually tour one of the terminals where they stage their vessels. And over the next couple slides, I have some photos to show you guys. So on the right is a photo. There's a picture of a tower, so one of those windmill towers to the right, and then that red thing is a crane. That's the crane that's actually used to load the windmills onto the cargo ships before they go offshore. And this just in general, for me, was a kind of a unique opportunity because it was interesting to see just how large these items are, just so up close and personal. So this photo is a picture of the shells. So these are the shells that protect, inside the tower, there's a lot of electrical equipment. So these are the shells that make up those towers that are pieced together and then put on the cargo ship using that crane. And you could just see as you see the NTAP members, think of an average size man and how large those towers are comparatively. And then in this photo to the right, we've got those windmill blades. And then on the left is the centerpiece where those 3 blades are mounted onto that centerpiece and then mounted onto the tower itself. So for NTAP, we have some upcoming meetings in the works. First, we have our next NTAP working group meeting on August 22nd. This is to continue our discussions on the industry-based survey pilot project. I imagine that there will be additional working group meetings after this August 22nd meeting as we need to fully flush out what the pilot project looks like. If we're hoping to have something planned for fiscal year 2025. And then in December, on the 12th, we have our NTAP orientation meeting. This is a new meeting that we're having annually. It's really for new NTAP members or existing NTAP members or even members of the public that want to learn more about, the background, goals, and focus behind NTAP. And then I imagine our next full NTAP meeting will be in early 2025. And before we move into questions or discussion, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Catherine Ford with the Northeast Fisheries Science Center on the left, who is the lead for NTAP from the Science Center point. And then we've got our co-chairs in the center, our chair, Mr. Wes Townsend, and then on the right, Dan Salerno, who's from the New England Council. With that, that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. As you can tell, that is not a trawl that I'm hauling, it's a pot. I do know the difference. Any questions for Hannah? Seeing none. Anything from the audience? Eric Reed.
Good afternoon. My name is Eric Reed. I'm from North Kingstown, Rhode Island. I'm a member of the NTAP working group. It's pretty nerve-wracking sitting right here, I'll tell you right now. I have a lot of questions, but I want to make it short. In the middle of page 8 of the July 11th summary, it talks about having a working group meeting to identify a plan and cost. It's relatively easy for the industry to identify costs. We know what nets cost, we know what doors cost, we know what electronics costs, but we do not know what the science side cost is. And it's been asked, I don't know how many times, I've asked that question quite a lot. But when you go to Congress and say, I need some money for a survey, they say, well, how much do you need? And when you say, hey, I'm not really sure, they had nice talking to you, get out. So we have to know what that cost is. And we have a working group meeting in a few short weeks. And my question is, are we going to know that number at that meeting?
Hannah, if you want to take a stab at it, or do you want to send it over to John?
Well, I could take a start, and then if John wants to add anything. I don't know if we'll for sure have that number at that particular meeting. I'm hopeful that we'll have that number at least, as we continue these conversations and hopefully have a plan fully fleshed out. And I would imagine that we need that number in order for anything to, hit the ground running. John, I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, you're correct, Ken. I mean, there's still, a couple of different variables that we need to work on. That working group will sort of work through those. So to Hannah's point, certainly we're working on putting costs together for a full pilot survey. And I don't want to give a time frame, but there is $3 million in the FY25 budget from the Senate committee mark that gives us sort of a scaler, which will also help sort of get the exact cost down for what we can do for $3 million.
Eric?
Thank you very much. I appreciate the answer, but it's really unsatisfactory. We want to get this thing on the water next year, and we're going to run out of time unless we make some progress here. And we're not making any progress. And in that report on the 11th, it does mention several times that things are unclear and the working group is unclear. And I don't believe that that is correct. The work of that working group is not unclear. There has been several sets of recommendations on what industry vessels can do and cannot do and what they recommend doing and not doing. Auto trawl is a perfect example. If there's one boat in the fleet and you got one boat, it's ludicrous to concentrate on auto trawl when you have dozens of boats that do not have it and are more than willing to do the survey. But I just want to be very clear that the working group is pretty laser focused on how this gets done. And if we don't get some help here and move this thing along, we're not going to get it on the water when we want. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Welcome back, Eric. We missed you. Anything else for Hannah? Seeing none, thank you very much, Hannah. That wraps up our last agenda item for the day, but I do have, Mike Luisi has something quick to say, and then I think Chris Moore has an announcement after that.
Yeah, thanks, Wes. Before Chris gets into hospitality, I just wanted to let people know over the last couple of weeks, I've been organizing an event for tomorrow night over at the Phillies Stadium. The Phillies are playing the Marlins. And I've got about 20 people or so signed up to go. We've got tickets, but tickets are becoming a very short supply. There are 2 tickets left in the section where we're all going to be. So if anyone still wants to go, let me know. My ticket window might be closed, but I can certainly help you find the ticket online. And if you want to go over to the game with us tomorrow night, just let me know and I can help you out. Thanks.
Chris Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, everyone. We will have hospitality this evening. Everyone's invited. The room number is 1516, 1516. See you there. Thanks.
All right, with that concludes today's meeting. Let's meet